Hey guys, this is going to be a compilation of Boros content that I've made over the years, and that's because Boros is one of my favorite characters. I mean, clearly, I've made like over a dozen videos of this guy. I even have a full playlist dedicated to him, but most of that is going to be in this video, so enjoy. We're going to be talking about what if Boros came back into the story. And let me also point out that there's like a 0.00001, whatever chance that this could actually happen, but probably not. And we're going to be taking a look at two scenarios where I think that if this could happen, these would be the likely ways. So the last time we see Boros is at the end of chapter 35 when he's defeated by Saitama. He's walking away from Boros' body and there's like debris falling on him. And then in the following chapter, the core breaks and then the ship falls and it's like a mass explosion. So that was pretty much the end of Boros. However, at the end of chapter 36, it says Metal Knight recovered the spacecraft and took it somewhere. And that's going to be the first and last time we ever hear about this. And before I go any further, let me just say that this is just important for the future of the story, regardless of Boros' unlikely involvement in it. But anyway, now that Metal Knight has his ship, what if he also finds Boros' body there as well? Because like I said, the last time we saw Boros, Saitama was walking away from his body and we didn't see what happened to it after that. Now, ostensibly, he's straight up dead. I mean, he took the force of a serious punch, probably the strongest thing we've seen in the series so far, and impressively was able to speak afterwards. But then he coughs up before saying his final words. We could assume that that's probably when he died. So the ship falling and the subsequent explosions are kind of just overkill, right? Well, what if he survives that too? What if he wasn't dead after coughing up and saying his last words? And what if on top of that, he survives the ship falling and the explosion? I mean, why not? If he was able to survive the force of a serious punch and talk afterwards, a ship falling and explosions are, probably going to be less than that. So let's just say he's at like 0.1 health at this point. And when Metal Knight is taking a survey of the ship, he comes across Boros' body that's barely alive. And what happens after this point is really up in the air because we don't know the true character of Metal Knight yet. Right now, one kind of wants us to pick sides of who the traitor is or who's affiliated with the organization. Like, is the bad guy Metal Knight or is it Drive Knight? And if you follow the channel, I'm sure you're aware that I think Metal Knight is being wrongfully accused by Drive Knight, who is the true traitor, true big villain, and the mad cyborg. But there's always a possibility that that is not the case, and Metal Knight is in fact the true villain and pulling the strings of the organization means. So if that was the case, and Metal Knight came across Boros' body, then it's obvious at that point he's going to turn him into a cyborg, like the organization has been doing so far. And who's to say how powerful he would be, probably like close to God level, I guess. But if he's not the traitor and the villain and, the string puller of the organization, and he's more what I think he is, which is like kind of like a gray area character, like lawful neutral or something. So if he found Boros' body, then what would he do with it? Well, I'd assume that maybe he would still try to make him into a cyborg, but it hasn't been shown yet that Bofoy deals with cyborg stuff. He's been shown to be exclusively on just straight robotic side of things. However, that doesn't mean that I don't think that he's capable of making a cyborg. I mean, he built the Hero Association in 7 days. I'm sure he can figure out how to do cyborg stuff, right? So in that case, then I guess he would cyborgify Boros' body. But then that raises the question of, okay, so is he going to just leave him as is, or is he going to take away his free will? And I think if it came down to that, it's very possible that Metal Knight would take away his free will. Not necessarily because that's an evil thing to do, but because it's I guess the pragmatic thing, and also maybe he wouldn't even see Boros as a human or a person. He would see him closer to an animal or something because he's an alien. So taking away his free will probably wouldn't really morally bother him that much. So now that Boros is revived and back in the story, when would we see him? And to be honest, I don't think we would see him immediately because Metal Knight has obviously been very conservative with his power. We the audience have just seen so little of it. And other than that, there's just heavy implications on how powerful he could be. It said that the Hero Association organization fears the full potential of his arsenal, and Psycho saying that he was only one of 4 heroes who could potentially defeat Elder Centipede. So I think it's safe to say that he is way more powerful than what we have seen. And now that he has Boros' ship, I'm sure he's even more powerful. And in this scenario, he can even use the ship to like fortify Boros' new cyborg armor. And that being said, this new Boros is probably like, you know, close to God level, meaning that it's, you know, might be the strongest thing that Befoi has. So it would be like a last resort type of thing for Befoi to unleash this cyborg Boros, meaning that if he eventually has like a serious beef with Saitama and they wind up squaring off, then I guess he's going to send Boros after him eventually once he realizes the full extent of Saitama's power. And if it's not Saitama, then maybe he would wind up sending him after Drive Knight. Like if this story eventually boils down to like Drive Knight at his full power, then I guess, you know, he in theory could be strong enough to warrant Drive Knight sending Boros after him. And then if it's neither of those, then, you know, it's eventually going to happen with God coming back in the prophecy. So we'd at least see that, but then I don't think super powerful cyborg Boros is going to be able to do much against God. So that's one scenario. Now let's take a look at the other one, and I'm sure you know where I'm going because you saw it in the thumbnail, and that's Phoenix Man. So as I'm sure some of you remember, Phoenix Man used to have this form called Brilliant Eagle or Diamond Eagle, but this form was retconned in the redraws of chapter 98 through 100, like when he's fighting Child Emperor. However, they kept one of his major abilities that he had in that form, which is his reanimation ability. It was now retconned to where his resurrected form can now use it. And we see him using it to bring back the ninjas. But I think him still having this ability is more important than him just simply bringing back the ninjas, on top of the fact that he goes on to live this fight where originally he didn't, and in the redraws we see him regress into like that chick form. And I think that he is eventually going to regain his strength again, and we will see him some way or another evolve to Brilliant Eagle. Like I think that this form is going to come back into the story just later on. So let's just say for the sake of this video, he eventually does regain his Brilliant Eagle form. Like somehow in his chick form he regains enough strength to go back to his costume form maybe, and then he fights some people, and then they push him to like getting multiple Zenkais again, you know, using his ability, and then he's able to evolve to the Brilliant Eagle form again. And then once he's there, you know, he has all the abilities that he originally did, on top of having the reanimation ability, but he's also just so powerful that very few characters can challenge him, I guess. So let's just say he either comes across Metal Knight, who maybe still has Boros' body, or he just organically comes across Boros' body, like in a city or something, or someone else has Boros, or he just comes across Boros. Then he resurrects him. However, his reanimation ability kind of makes them into like zombies, so this would be like a zombie Boros that's subservient to him. But also, you know, he'd be resurrecting like his defeated, you know, chewed up goopy form. So let's just say his powers can like regenerate him too. Now he's back to like his released form, but he's like a zombie released Boros. So now he's in the story, but we could take it further. So let's just say Phoenix Man is having his rematch with Child Emperor, and he's already resurrected Boros, and he has zombie Boros fighting against Child Emperor using Brave Giant. And it gets to the point of where, I don't know, they're in water or something for some reason, and then Child Emperor activates his Gigavolt Smash, and this fully resurrects Boros, just like how it did with the ninjas. So now Boros is just completely back. He has his wits back. He's fully self-aware. And then he like one-shots Brave Giant, and then he turns around and sees Phoenix Man, and then he like attacks Phoenix Man too, and probably straight up kills him maybe, like just bypasses the Zenkai stuff and just immediately kills him. And then we just have a Boros on the loose, like he's back. And then whatever happens after that is, you know, a story for another time, I suppose. This is kind of similar to what eventually happens in Jujutsu Kaisen. No spoilers, but if you know, you know. So those are like the two main scenarios where I see Boros coming back if he were to. And again, you know, this is just for fun. And I guess there is a third option, like once God comes into the story, like once he's resurrected, then he somehow resurrects Boros, maybe.
All right, so I got a spicy one today. This might be a little too spicy because sometimes you guys get a little nutty when I start talking about stuff like this, but this is also a highly requested video and just topic of discussion in general because, you know, given the recent developments in the manga with Arochi coming back to life. It leads us to think like, okay, so now that Arochi is back, is another previous villain who was, consensus above dragon, taken out by Saitama in somewhat of an ambiguous way. Is he gonna come back too? But first, let us go over the untimely demise of Boros, and let me also put it out there that I'm gonna be comparing a lot of this stuff to Orochi's return, because I think it'll help us with this discussion overall. So, as most of us know, at the end of Season 1, Boros was serious punched by Saitama, or at least the force of it hit him. There was like no real physical contact made, but that doesn't really matter because it turned Boros into like a microwave pile of goop. Now, Boros was able to talk and stay somewhat conscious after this serious punch. Actually, more so than Arochi, because after Arochi got normal punched, definitely not serious punch, and Saitama himself said that it was a normal punch, Arochi only really said like one thing. He was like, "So this is terror." Meanwhile, Boros, friggin' serious punch, was able to have like a back and forth with Saitama. And this also brings me back to what I was saying about the ambiguity of his death, because it is somewhat ambiguous, because there's never really like a point where it's absolutely 100% confirmed is definitely dead. Now, of course, there's a lot of signs to show that he is, and I don't want to grasp at too many straws here, but, Arochi, I would say, was more so confirmed to be dead than Boros, because, in the following chapter 109, after he got punched by Saitama, Psycho straight up, observed Orochi's skull cap and was like, "Oh, he dead." And, it's like, Psycho, being an Esper, probably has a better grasp of understanding the life force of someone than, like, a typical person. As we're with, like, Boros, we don't get that. It kind of just, he talks, and then, like in the manga, he spits up some blood, which is, the universal sign of somebody's nearing death or is about to die. And then the core on the ship explodes. So that could be signifying right there that Boros' life is gone and that, he has moved on to the alien afterlife, possibly. But we don't get to see him, for sure die. The ship goes down, and then, after Saitama walks away, that's the last time we ever see Boros. So if there's hope for somebody like Arochi to come back after being straight up confirmed to be dead, then come on, at least there's somewhat of a possibility that Boros could come back too. Because also another similarity that we have here is the regeneration ability. Now, Boros shown many times that he had this crazy regeneration ability before death and everything, but Arochi not so much. I mean, we can kind of guess that Arochi had a regeneration ability because he was, going down the path of monstrification. He was going deeper and deeper into that power. And we know that what comes with that power is regeneration. So we just, of course, didn't know that he was going to be able to use it to this extent and slowly rebuilding himself by, like, grabbing monsters and stuff. Now, Boros is an alien. He's not tapping into the same power source that Arochi is. His regeneration is more of an inherent ability of his race. So we don't really know all of the intricacies of it. We don't know if he can come back after dying or if he can slowly rebuild himself. But I would say that Boros just has as much of potential or even more potential to come back from this death encounter than Arochi does, because we saw that after getting consecutive normal punch by Saitama, when he was reduced to just like mush, like he just had an eyeball left and he was able to come back instantly from that. So obviously we haven't seen Arochi do anything like that. It's actually taking him much more of an arduous task to come back from just heart element, whatever that means. Regardless, Arochi coming back in this amorphous form means that, in theory, the microwaved pile of goop that Boros was could come back too. So now that we've broken all of that stuff down, let's go into the somewhat realistic possibilities of what could happen within the story. So I've got about 3 of these possibilities, but the first one is the most popular and the one that makes the most sense, and that is it having something to do with Metal Knight, because we know for sure Metal Knight is in control and possession of Boros' spaceship. We saw that he was salvaging it at the end of Season 1, and then in the data book it later confirmed that he does have Boros' ship. It's possible that he has come across Boros' microwaved corpse. Now, I mean, why wouldn't he? I mean, because it's there, right? Or we could just want to assume that it was completely destroyed when the ship fell down. Maybe not. But this is the most realistic scenario that I personally see Boros having a chance of coming back here. Now, even if Bufoy does find Boros' corpse, why does he have incentive to try to bring him back to life? Well, I don't know, curiosity maybe. It could be plot-induced just to have Boros come back as a later adversary. But also we have to, remember that Bufoy is not like a biological engineer, or he doesn't have specialty in that type of stuff. He's like a technological type of dude. So we can't just assume that because he knows technological stuff that he'd be able to bring back, a biological being. But, maybe he could. Maybe he can, like, jumpstart him, shoot him with a couple, 1.21 gigawatts and bring him back to life. And then I know that a lot of us have the theories in our head that he's going to come back, Mecha Frieza style. And that is possible, too, because there are a lot of parallels to be drawn between Boros and Frieza, especially the way that they die. Like, Frieza was reduced to, like, a chewed-up torso, and then he came back, in a mecha style. And instead of, like, Metal Knight having this ultimate end-all, be-all, unbeatable, above-dragon robot in the future of the story, he might just have, like, Mecha Boros, who is under his control, possibly. I don't know, but it just seems like this is the most likely thing for Boros to come back. Now, there are two other possibilities, and this is going to involve some headcanon here, but I think it's pretty entertaining. But I'm also going to have to go into webcomic spoilers in order to break this down. So if you don't want to know what's going to happen past what the manga is currently on, I suggest you check out now. So possibility number 2 brings us to Dr. Genus. So after the Monster Association war wraps up, Zombie Man goes to talk to Dr. Genus, and he's like, hey, you were right about Saitama, blah, blah, blah. Hey, remove my limiter. And Dr. Genus is like, nah, but come down into the basement. I got something I want to show you. So we have no idea what this means. This storyline has not been resolved yet. But given that it's Dr. Genus, we can assume that maybe it has something to do with, like, some kind of experiment that he's working on. Now, like what I was talking about with Dr. Bufoy, he's not really, like, a biological type of dude. Dr. Genus, however, is. So if anybody were to come across Boros' corpse and be able to do something with it and bring it back to life and probably make it even more powerful, it would be Dr. Genus. But we're going to have to try to figure out, like, how would he even come across Boros' corpse in the first place? Well, this is where headcanon's going to come into play. Maybe he sent Armored Gorilla to go investigate the alien ship crash. Armored Gorilla was able to get past Metal Knight's robots or whatever, and then just found Boros' corpse. It was like, hey, this is interesting. Let me bring this back to Dr. Genus. And then we come to the point of him resurrecting Boros, and then that's how Dr. Genus comes back into the story as a potential villain, which I don't think is going to happen. But in this scenario, maybe, or he brings back Boros to be like a justice type of dude. Maybe he wants him to defend humanity. Maybe he's changed his ways. I don't know, but that's just one possibility that I want to throw out there. So the last possibility, and this is the most headcanon, but I think this is the most entertaining and something that I think you're going to get hyped on, and that is God bringing Boros back. So hear me out. Now, God seems to have some type of omniscience ability to him. Because how was he able to hear Homeless Emperor talking about hating humans and all of that stuff? And how was he able to intervene at the exact moment that he was going to off himself, for the sake of the ecosystems? I'm assuming that he can hear everything, or selectively can hear what he wants. So given that, he probably is definitely aware of the whole Boros invasion. Now, given that Boros was about to destroy all of humanity with his cannon, maybe that, excited God. He was like, oh, this guy is prepared to take out humanity. I'm on board with this dude. And then he uses his powers, to just bring Boros back to life, because maybe he could do it. And then maybe he talks to Boros in his mind. He's like, hey, I like what you're doing. I'm a fan of your work. I can bring you back to life, and I can even buff you. But you kind of got to be my servant, and you just got to take out humanity. And after that, you can just do whatever you want. Just don't destroy the Earth, bro, because I love the Earth. I kind of am the Earth. And that would be awesome. That also brings us to the end game of the series as to where, God is going to be the final villain. Nothing's going to change there. But then Boros, revived Boros, is going to be like his right-hand man. Wouldn't that be awesome? I'm getting excited just thinking about it. Somebody should make that fan manga for me. But, we've got Saitama fighting God at the end of the series, and then his right-hand man, Boros, fights everyone else, or at least all of the major players at that point in the story. But, I don't know. Just a lot of headcanon, a lot of speculation. Probability of that happen is probably less than 1%. But, that's pretty much it for all of the Boros return talk that I have. All right, let's talk about an age-old question in the community, something that I get personally asked about a lot, and that is, how powerful is Boros in his armored form, or armored Boros, or base Boros, whatever you want to call him. And it's a pretty intriguing question because, why not? We know how strong he is in his released form and, of course, in his Meteor Burst form, but how strong is he at base level? So, granted, we haven't seen him in combat, really, aside from getting punched, which, of course, we're going to be talking about, in his armored form, so it's really up in the air, and your opinion on this is just as valid as mine, but I do think we can kind of come up with a reasonable answer to this, and I'm just going to go over all of the evidence and info that we have and cross-compare some stuff. So first of all, let's just go into Boros as a person, or as a being, as an alien, whatever you want to call him. So we know that his species survived the struggle for existence on a very harsh planet. Like, the images that we see of it, there's like volcanoes everywhere, there's fire raining from the sky. He's pretty much living in hell, like every single day. So they've overcome all of these harsh environmental factors for however long in order to evolve into this crazy powerful species. They're like, I guess, the Titans of the One Punch Man world, like Thanos' race, the Titans. We also know that they possess the greatest natural healing in the universe. Take that for what you will. Because we know that Boros and the Dark Matter Thieves are kind of hyperbolic with their achievements and whatnot, because, Garukin Troop said that he was the greatest psychic in the universe, and we know that that's probably not the case. But regardless, it's still pretty darn impressive. But on top of all of that, Boros has the greatest healing, physical performance, and potential energy of his entire race. So I think this is also drawing more parallels to Thanos, because I guess it was implied that Thanos was like the greatest Titan, more or less, at least in the MCU, I guess, I don't know. But regardless, Boros is insane. He is super powerful. He is the dominator of the universe for a reason, and the whole thing that we're talking about with his armor, he's wearing that to just nerf himself, because he is so incredibly powerful. So let's get a little more into that armor, because it's kind of important for the question at hand here. So Boros himself says that the armor holds in his overwhelming power. So I guess it's like shutting off the kinetic energy, or whatever kind of energy that he is producing here when he's outside of it. And with that being said, it doesn't really seem like the armor is for any kind of protective purposes. I mean, I'm sure it's durable, because it's Boros, and I'm sure he has high-grade stuff. Just based off of him saying that it holds in his power, I don't think he's wearing it to, protect him from outside forces, because, he's Boros. He doesn't really need, armor. It's more so just to hold in his energy. So that brings us to the punch. This first punch that Saitama delivers to Boros when they first meet. And this is the most important thing that we could go off of to really gauge how powerful Boros is in his base form. So that being said, with everything else, I don't think that the armor helped Boros take this punch. Now, maybe a little bit. A tiny bit possible. But still, this punch wrecked Boros. Regardless if he has the armor on or not, we see his reaction to getting punched. He's like, oh, crap. It sends him far back, right into that pillar, breaks it up, and Boros is it looks like he's incapacitated for a second. Maybe he knocked him out a moment or two. I don't know. But him getting up from this and his armor breaking surprises Saitama. And I think that kind of dispels any notions that people have of implying Saitama was holding back in this moment. I don't think Saitama was holding back. Yeah, I mean, sometimes he is, but I don't think in this case. We've seen that he just more or less wants to get the job done against monsters and whatever other aliens and whatnot, because Boros has also already committed genocide at this point, so he's unredeemable. It's not like Saitama's trying to have a fun time with him, so I don't think he would be surprised by Boros surviving the punch if he intentionally held back, expecting him to get up. You know what I mean? But regardless, it's still pretty darn impressive that Boros is able to survive this punch. I mean, regardless of the intention of it, any monster that takes a punch from Saitama and gets up from it, still in one piece, still conscious, if anything,
shows that he's one of the strongest monsters. Because we saw Carnage Kabuto, before this was probably the strongest monster that we have seen, or just kind of, I guess, couldn't take one punch from Saitama, and it didn't seem like the punch that he gave to Carnage Kabuto really had any more effort to it than the punch that he gave to Boros. It doesn't seem like there was any more killing intent behind it, I'll say. Because the other example that we could go off of is Saitama against Arochi, who is another super powerful monster who's definitely above Dragon. And it seems like Saitama was definitely trying to kill Arochi with that punch that he delivered through his head. So it's hard to say if that was on the same level that he's giving to Boros here, but regardless, I think that they both have killing intent behind them. Also, speaking of Arochi and Carnage Kabuto, just like them, Boros is able to sense Saitama's energy, although he seems to have a better understanding of this than them. In Carnage Kabuto's sense, it was him saying that his survival instincts were telling him that Saitama is super dangerous. And with Arochi, it's not really made too clear. He's kind of just aware that Saitama is no joke. But Boros seemed to actually be able to comprehend the immeasurable energy coming from Saitama. So before I go into my conclusion, I just want to touch on one thing real quick, and that's the certain group of people that think that Armored Boros is a planet buster just as is. So people think this because of the compost, the little companion guide that we get with the One Punch Man Blu-ray. This book doesn't really mean much. It's just a transcript of everything that we see in the anime. It's not written by one. It's just written by somebody that works for the company, I guess. Who knows? It could have been anyone that wrote this. But all of the information coming from this book is what you can just see or hear in the anime. That's it. So for the section on Boros, we see the first page has him in his armored form, and then we have like a summary of text next to him, and it's just summarizing his character. That's it. It's not giving us any deep cuts or kind of new information that we didn't already know about. But in this little thing of information, it's telling us, about his species, the regenerative stuff, everything that we already know. And then it says, along with latent energy so powerful that it can destroy entire planets. And people just, I don't know, for some reason just link this to Armored Boros being able to destroy entire planets just because he's on this page. But this is just because we know, because he says this. They're just talking about him in the Meteor Burst form doing the collapsing star roaring cannon. Also, shout out to Scummeridge on Reddit for even supplying us with these images of the compost. But yeah, that's all it was. It wasn't saying that Armored Boros can destroy a planet. It's just saying that he has latent potential to destroy a planet because he does. He says that he does when he's in his Meteor Burst form. So now let's go to the actual data book, the one that was actually written by one and has some deep cuts on the characters. So this doesn't really give us any new info on Armored Boros, except that his height is 7 feet 8 inches tall, or 2.4 meters, which is pretty tall. But it's giving us his disaster level, which says Dragon. So we all know the whole thing about when one was asked what his disaster level was in an interview, he said Dragon or above or equal to or greater than Dragon. But in the data book, it simply just says Dragon, and this is coming from 1. So this could mean that just Boros, when he comes down to Earth, in his armored form, is considered to be disaster level Dragon. And that when one was asked in the interview, he was saying Dragon or greater or equal to Dragon, meaning that after his armor comes off, then it's up in the air. Then he's greater than Dragon after that point, meaning that he likely goes to above Dragon, the term that we associate to characters of that power level. And then maybe after Meteoric Burst, he's approaching God or whatever. So let's just backtrack from Meteoric Burst all the way down to Armored, and I think that might give us more or less what we're working with there. So if we say that Meteoric Burst is close to God level or on the level of God, whatever, we're going back to released Boros, who I think we can determine is definitely an above Dragon level threat. But we see the discrepancy in power between these two, because while he's in his released form, he's giving Saitama the most competitive fight we have ever seen. Super fast, super strong, has the energy blasts, but then when he goes to Meteoric Burst, that all just goes to the next level. Like, so fast that he is literally surprising Saitama with his speed. The energy blast, the regeneration, everything just goes up a level. So if we go below released, we could just try to guess what his speed would be like. It's just a slower form of what he's like in his released. You know, if we're just comparing the increase that the released gets from going into Meteor Burst, if we kind of try to use the same percentages just in our mind to decrease it into his armored form, then we can kind of see that he's as fast and as strong as, like, just taking a guess here, maybe Carnage Kabuto, maybe like a stronger form of that. You know, considering that he can actually take a punch from Saitama and Carnage Kabuto can't. So if Carnage Kabuto is like a high dragon, which he very likely is, considering that he can push Darkshine to his limit for 15 minutes, he's likely a high dragon there. So if we're looking at a similar set of skills that Boros has, because they, you know, they're very similar in their fighting style, they're just very physical, super fast, you know, punching type style, then I guess he's like a stronger version of Carnage Kabuto, but not quite as strong as his released form. So I guess this means that he's like a really high dragon, or maybe the highest of the high dragons. Like, he's as strong as a dragon can get before going into above dragon. Maybe that's possibly where Armored Boros sits, you know, but he's also, we can assume that he's losing the ability to shoot the energy blasts that released Boros has, because, you know, the whole armor is restricting that and everything. So I'm just assuming that maybe he's like a stronger version of Carnage Kabuto with the ability to regenerate, more or less. So yeah, that's pretty much it, I guess. I mean, I tried, guys. It's super subjective, especially with this, considering that the only feat that Armored Boros has is just taking a punch from Saitama and sensing his energy.
So today we're going to be completing the set because we're taking a look at how powerful released Boros is. And this is, of course, the Boros that we see after his armor gets knocked off and he gets all big, blue, and sparkly. So in case you're unaware, for some reason, maybe you just watch Season 1 or something, but this version of Boros is still pretty much second only to Saitama in the manga. Like, he's that powerful, you know, number 2, I guess. I mean, top of the power scale. So now let's get into his attributes, because, like, how strong is he, like, physical strength overall? And it's difficult to say because we don't really have too many comparisons here, so we're going to have to speculate with Boros. But I think that, you know, with speculations, typically maybe we shouldn't be too generous, but with Boros' case here, I think we should. I think he's earned it. I mean, he's immediately already established that he can take a punch from Saitama. So he's coming off of that, and he's the first person pretty much to do so. So he's going to be pretty strong. Just keep that in mind. So I guess he can, like, exchange blows with Saitama, like get into like a scuffle with him or something where they're both landing on each other. Now, we don't exactly get to see this, but after he becomes released, he like goes after Saitama and then it cuts away. And then when it comes back to them, we see that Saitama is like scuffed up. He's got some marks on him and Boros is missing an arm. And also, you know, Saitama didn't have these marks beforehand. So something happened. They got into a fight, you know, I guess blows were exchanged and Boros lost an arm. So I'll also give Boros like a half point for that, because it's kind of like taking a punch from him, but, you know, at the same time it's not. But, you know, so half point, still pretty impressive that he can keep going. So I guess we can compare this to Arochi, like Saitama going against him, because I guess Arochi tries to get into an exchange of blows with Saitama using like the water stream, the one-armed dragon thing that he does, but this just has no success against it whatsoever. And Saitama just like casually fends this off and, you know, blows up his left arm. You know, similar to him taking off an arm from Boros here. But the lack of context that we get from their initial exchange, it's difficult to say like who was more impressive in this instance here. But I'm going to say Boros, because like the follow-up exchange that he goes against Saitama that we actually do get to see, I guess he's like going blow for blow with him for a little bit here. I mean, it's hard to make out exactly what's happening, but you know, granted, Boros has one arm here and he's still going tit for tat with Saitama, and they're like, it looks like they're connecting with each other, and Boros is obviously able to keep going here. They're having like a straight up Dragon Ball Z fight here. It's pretty crazy. So the fact that Arochi doesn't even come close to replicating this against Saitama when he tries to go for like a physical exchange with him, I'm going to say that Boros, released Boros, is probably stronger than the peak of Arochi that we've seen so far. I mean, it just seems that way to me. So another way to see like how Boros is leagues above everyone else in physical strength is like when he's hitting Saitama. Now, granted, others have hit Saitama and many made a move and stuff, you know, Suiryu and Carnage Kabuto and Beefcake, etc. But man, no one is really doing what Boros is doing here, because also Saitama was not concerned with them at all. Like, he was like concerned about his wig going against Suiryu. He cared about the sail, you know, going against Carnage Kabuto, and Beefcake, he just, you know, that was episode 1 Saitama. But it's like Boros landing here is, you know, this is a Saitama that's giving way more effort than he did against them, and he's sending him flying through like his spaceship pillars. Like, this is crazy how powerful this is here. Like, just swap out Saitama with any other character, and, like, what's going to happen here? Like, even if we can just go to, like, Darkshine, maybe Darkshine could take this and get up afterwards, but he's pretty much done. Is that, like, I'm being generous with the speculation and saying that, like, if he can just destroy Darkshine with, like, 2 or 3 moves here, then there's really no one else that stands a chance with confirmed level of power, I'll say it for now. And this brings me to the last thing I want to touch on about Boros' strength. So in the follow-up to this sequence, on the beginning of chapter 36, we see a picture of Saitama on the cover page, and he's, like, bewildered. The most bewildered, I guess, we've ever seen Saitama. And it says on the original chapter, like, that was released on the Tona Renoige website, it says he took damage. Okay, but then in the volume version, that line is removed, but it's still there to this day on the official website. So I don't know if it's a retcon. I don't know what this means, but regardless, even if it is just official straight up canon that it says he took damage on the cover here, I still don't know what it means. Does it literally mean that he took damage here? That Boros is the only one to pretty much inflict damage on post-limit removal Saitama? Maybe. Maybe not. But even if he did inflict damage, it's like, how much? Was it like 0.00001% damage to him? Or was it 1%? Was it 10%? It's like, we'll never know unless we talk to one himself. So in order to figure out how fast he is, we're going to have to continue our crazy speculation here. But I think, you know, come on, fair to say that he's probably just as fast, if not faster, than Flashy Flash. Because, I mean, just look at the way that he is moving and competing with Saitama here. It's ridiculous. Like, the way that this is illustrated in both the manga and animated in the anime. It's like, it's showing us that he's, like, you know, pretty much at the top tier level of speed. Now, we've seen, you know, Suiryu move like this and have illustrations like this. And, you know, we've seen Flashy Flash as well. But it's like, the fact that Saitama has to give this much effort and is able to, like, you know, keep going with, or should I say Boros is actually able to keep going with him, it's fair to say that he's probably just as fast or faster than any S-Class hero. Because, like, look, when we go to, like, Saitama going against Sonic, Saitama has no care in the world. He's just standing there. He's always takes him out in pretty much a stationary fashion. So when we're going to Boros here, obviously giving way more effort than he is against Sonic. So there is a large gap in between Boros' perceived speed and Sonic's, you know, going off of Saitama's reaction to them. So the difference between Boros and Sonic, how large is it? No way to say, but I'm going to say it's at least equal to and or greater to the gap between Sonic and Flashy Flash, okay? So as for his durability, well, we're going to have to speculate as well, because unfortunately we never see released Boros take like a clean punch the way that we see like Armored and Meteor Burst Boros take. So like, you know, we're going to have to settle in between them. Meteor Burst Boros was taking like a punch from Saitama, the best we've ever seen anyone take it. Like, he took it and then like went back like, I don't know, 50 feet and then kept going. As where, you know, Armored Boros took a punch, went flying into the wall, and then, you know, his armor came off. He you know, he was definitely affected by it. So we'll meet in the middle, and we'll say that Armored Boros, you know, considering that his arm got punched off and he kept going, he could probably take a punch from Saitama better than Armored Boros did and kept going. So the fact that he can probably do that means that there's really no one else that can match that level of durability. Like, you know, when we saw Suiryu going against Goketsu, that's pretty much what it would look like if anyone else besides Saitama more or less went against Armored Boros at this point. And then, of course, you know, he also has Regeneration. This is just insult to injury because he doesn't really need this. He's already pretty much broken without it. But his Regeneration in released form is pretty much in the top tier. I mean, it's not at the very top. I mean, he could just straight up regenerate his lost arm here in like a second. It's insane. Like, the only people that are really surpassing him are himself in Meteor Burst form, and then like Melzergard, Black Ass, Evil Natural Water, guys like that. But aside from that, he's pretty much at the top. And then lastly, let's take a look at Boros' energy projection, another ability that he doesn't really need, you know, like his regeneration, because he's already overpowered without it. But this thing is like, oh my god, so overpowered. If we're comparing like the blast radius of this, you know, the top of Boros' ship to the city beneath them, it's taking out like, I don't know, a good chunk. There's a lot of casualties from this one blast here because like the cities in One Punch Man are like, I guess implied to be the size of like countries or something. So this maybe could be the size of like a small city or a town or something. Like this is so incredibly powerful. And that brings me to the closer here. Boros, released Boros, is the clear cut above Dragon. I mean, he literally is the reason why that term exists. Like, one in an interview when he was asked about Boros' disaster level, he was like, you know, rough translation here, but he more or less said that Boros' disaster level is greater to or equal than Dragon. And then somebody else said above Dragon, and I took it from there. So yeah, Boros is so powerful that not even one himself could just say that he was just a dragon. He is something more than that. So also it goes back to me saying he is the clear-cut number 2 so far.
All right, I'm excited for this one, and some of you know that Boros is one of my favorite characters, but I also really like crazy overpowered feats, and when they're done really well, of course. I mean, anybody could just make an overpowered character and say so-and-so can blow up a galaxy, but it doesn't really matter unless you really execute it well and truly show us the crazy feats of a certain character. And this is what we're going to be looking at with Boros, because they do it excellently, and it is so satisfying seeing this guy in action. So Meteor Burst Boros, of course, we're going to be talking about how powerful this monster among monsters, the freak of all freaks, really is, and where he stacks up in the One Punch Man universe. So in this video, I'm going to be saying things like strongest, fastest, most durable, but just remember that I'm not comparing him to Saitama. Saitama is the one above all. No one is close to him. I'm basically just saying that in relation to everyone else, so just keep that in mind. So let's get into it. So Meteor Burst is essentially Boros' ultimate form. It's all of the energy coming from in his body, which is an immense amount, and it's transforming into a propulsive force, elevating speed and power beyond the limitations of living flesh. And this is so powerful that the stress it puts on his body shortens his freaking lifespan. So all of the energy that we saw from a released Boros, that's just converted straight to fuel, and it's making this crazy overpowered beast of all beasts. So how strong is he? And not just overall, but like physical strength. Well, he's the strongest. Just remember what I said about Saitama earlier. So him just throwing a punch after like an initial lunge at Saitama, the force of it hitting him, and then we see the fallout from it, is so massive that it's blowing up the other half of his ship when they're on top of it. And if we're looking at the perspective of how big this ship is compared to the city below, it's essentially wiping out like a quarter, if not more, of the city. So this means that his punch, just the force of a lunge, I mean, it's not just a standard punch. I don't want to give him too much credit here, but him lunging and that punch is creating the force, I'm going to say similar to that of like Arochi's full powered beam. Maybe even more than that, maybe a tiny bit less, but it's very comparable to that. And that is just a friggin' punch from this guy lunging. And of course, we can't forget about the moon kick. He's so powerful that he kicked Saitama to the friggin' moon in like a second. That is absurd. Like, no other S-Class hero has even remotely come close to showing that levels of strength. And let's just go deeper, Because in the first iteration of Chapter 36, instead of the moon kick, Murata drew Boros breaking off this gigantic, like, skyscraper-esque pillar from the top of his ship, picking it up like it was like a spear or something, and then hucked it at Saitama, and with such force that it went directly to the bottom of his ship. Just keep in mind how big the ship is compared to a city. Now, of course, this does not happen in the final product. We get the moon kick instead, but this still happened. So it's like kind of like pseudo-canon in a way, but I still think this is illustrating how freakishly physically strong just Meteoric Boros is, which I think is a cut above every other character, at least that we have seen so far. Keep that in mind. We're probably going to see other freaks like this in the future, but as of right now, he is the king. So how fast is he? Well, there's no real way to like accurately say, well, he's this fast, but if we compare him to Flashy Flash, who is essentially the fastest character that we currently know of outside of Boros, we can see that he's probably faster than him, because when he initially lunges at Saitama after achieving his new form, Saitama looks genuinely surprised at the speed that he is capable of achieving here, and then immediately lands a punch square in his face. Now, Flashy Flash had a similar encounter with Saitama in Chapter 115, but he was coming around the corner on Saitama, catching him off guard, and Saitama gave kind of a similar reaction to it. It was surprised, but there's a contrast between the reaction that Saitama is giving to Boros lunging at him just straight in front of him, and Flashy Flash coming around the corner, which we could assume going at top speed because he uses his Flashy Slash, which is essentially his ultimate move. Now, Saitama dodges this pretty easily, and then he's kind of unfazed by it, and then he goes up in Flashy Flash's face. So we're seeing that Boros, who's a couple feet away from Saitama, who's in clear vision of him, surprising him and landing the shot. Flashy Flash, on the other hand, surprising him from around the corner and still misses 2 slashes. So I think this is showing us that Meteor Burst Boros is faster than Flashy Flash, probably by a lot. Both are fast, but there is a clear difference between the two. Also, the way that it's depicted when he's punching Saitama and landing these combos on him, it's easily the fastest depiction of speed we have ever seen in the series. I mean, just look, he's like in multiple places at once, and this isn't like Sonic's burial stuff or Tenfold Funeral. This is obviously on another level. I mean, also, like in another iteration of him landing combos on Saitama, it's just flashes of light going around Saitama while he's guarding. So, how durable is he? Well, you guessed it, he is the most durable, because he takes an earnest punch from Saitama. Now, this is not named, it doesn't say normal punch the way that he does against Arochi, but considering that Saitama throws this in retaliation to Boros' crazy onslaught combo move that we were just talking about, he hits him fair square right in the solar plexus and just sends him back like, I don't know, 50 feet or something like that, and he doesn't even fall. He regains his footing and stands his ground. No one does this to Saitama's punch. No one. Not even Darkshine in the VGS can take a punch from Saitama. And this guy is regaining his ground like it's like if Tank Top Master punched Puri Puri Prisoner or something. This is absurd levels of durability here. Now granted, a consecutive normal punch turns him into a Jackson Pollock painting, but he's still conscious while he's just Viscera, which is, I don't even understand how this is possible, but it just makes sense because of Boros' alien biology. He's just able to do this, but still, he's conscious and able to pull himself back together, which brings us to his regeneration ability, which is also the best. It's the top tier regeneration within the series. I mean, just in his released form, if he focused his energy, he can like regenerate his arm. But in Meteor Burst, he's coming back from just being goop. He's just goop into a normal form within an instant. And then finally, he was conscious after a serious punch. Like, I don't know what to tell you after that. I mean, yeah, it completely wrecked him and he was essentially on life support for like a couple seconds, but he was still conscious and had a mild conversation with Saitama. after a frigging serious punch. There's no one that could replicate this, at least currently. He is above everyone else easily in this feat as well. And then finally, let's talk about the collapsing star roaring cannon. So when he decides to release all of the energy that is fueling him, he can convert it into like a Kamehameha-esque beam. And this beam, as he claims, is powerful enough to destroy the Earth, making him the only known character currently with the ability to do that. So yeah, he can destroy the Earth if he wants to. But let us just remember that he's releasing all of his energy into this. So it's not like he can just keep going after this. This is like a one and done. This is like his final trump card move. And that brings me to his disaster level. Now, one said Boros' disaster level is greater to or equal than dragon, or above dragon or above, whatever translation you want to go with. Basically, he's not outright saying God. He doesn't even say God at all. So I think that's why he is not God, because he just doesn't have like a normal ability to destroy the planet. I'm just taking a guess here. None of this is like canon or gospel or confirmed or anything. I'm just trying to decipher why one said this. I mean, besides the obvious fact that he's waiting to reveal a disaster level god being, and he didn't want to use it on Boros since he was like the first big bad of the series. But since it's like his final end-all be-all thing that uses all of his energy, maybe that's holding him back from other legitimate god level beings out there. But that being said, I fully think that Meteor Burst Boros is the closest to god we have ever seen. And I think that like he should be considered at least like fringe disaster level god. Like I don't even think like above dragon is good enough for him. Like he's above dragon. If that makes sense. I don't want to get too outrageous with this stuff, but I can't exactly say he's God because one didn't, and we have to respect what one says, but man, he's right there. He's knocking at the door because the feats that we just went over are unrivaled at this point. I mean, maybe next year or the year after we'll see something close to this, but until then, he is in a league of his own, outside of Saitama, of course. It's pretty intriguing to think about the two strongest characters outside of Saitama going at it, or just who in theory would be stronger than the other. And that's mainly what we're going to be looking at in this video. And you also might be thinking, well, we don't have nearly enough info to come up with an answer to that. And while that's kind of true, I think that we have just enough. I mean, come on, we have a whole bunch of info on one character and then, you know, kind of some on the other, but I think it's just enough. But in order to even get into that stuff, gonna have to go into some webcomic spoilers. So if you don't want to know what's gonna happen, I suggest you check out now. So I'm mainly just gonna be going over Blast's feats, or at least the ones that we're told about, as well as the exposition given on him, and just comparing Boros to that the best that we can. So if you're not into speculation, then this video isn't for you, because this one is just for fun. We're just going to be going over a whole bunch of stuff and seeing what happens. So let's see where they match up in the strength and just overall power department. So we're just going to see if Blast could even compete with Boros in this way. So I think that he could, because we know that took Elder Centipede to the brink of death when they had fought. And we can just assume that this was Blast by himself. It wasn't stated that he had any kind of help or anything like that. And also going off of what Giro/Psycho said, it's highly insinuated that he did this by himself. So that means that he's likely stronger than Bang and Bomb combined. Because, like, when they teamed up and did their Sunday best to him, they could only really, like, annoy him and, like, break his carapace. That was the best they could do. And he just took that and just molted and came back. As to where Blast by himself, you know, brought him to the brink of death. So I think that's a good starting line right there. But also, we're going to go to the data book here, because the quote that we get from Fubuki regarding Blast says that he is stronger than King. And the people of One Punch Man's world, they can only equate King's accomplishments to those of Saitama. So I think at this point in the data book, King had defeated at least Beefcake and Vaccine Man, meaning that they see Blast, or at least Fubuki does, as someone stronger than someone capable of taking them down. And I think that's where we can line up at least the base level of Boros' strength, definitely in his released state. But also the data book says that he can shoot lasers from his eyes, and we'll get into that. But it also says that he rules over psychic powers and the ability to command trillions of robots. So we could just speculate about what this truly means, and I think it might possibly mean that there is no Esper ability or anyone with the Esper abilities that can like hold down Blast or restrain him or overpower him. You know, the way that we see Tatsumaki using her Esper abilities on many characters throughout the series. We even see that her in her weakened state is able to even restrain Awakened Garo for a moment or two. And at her best, even, you know, still recovering from her damaged state, she was able to lift Saitama like 2 feet off the ground. So this might be implying that, like, not even Tatsumaki, in theory, would be able to restrain Blast, because he's just so crazy powerful. And the robot line, of course, I assume is referring to Metal Knight, which might be implying that not even Metal Knight can really do anything to Blast. But let's go back to the shooting laser beams from his eyes, because this might be one of his main abilities that he has, but it also might be pointing to him being the allegory for Superman in this story, which is something I talk about in my Why Saitama is Going to Fight Blast video. So if Blast is truly one's allegory for Superman, then he's likely just as powerful as a character like that would be, not just from like an overall standing, but like a physical strength aspect. So I assume that just in theory, that someone that could solo Elder Centipede to the brink of death, someone that is stated to be stronger than King, someone who can't be overcome by Esper abilities. Oh, and she also says that she speculates that he can defeat the entire S-Class at once. This all kind of lines up with what we would assume about Boros, more or less. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who would probably debate that a full-powered Tatsumaki could probably do well against Boros, which, like I said, is debatable, and it could be argued, but this info from the data book is kind of throwing that out the window. So this might be giving us some insight that Blast, at the minimum, is as strong as Boros from a physical aspect, but might even be stronger than him. But also the shooting the laser from his eyes, which I assume is similar to Superman's, maybe it's like Homelander's from The Boys. We're not really sure how big and powerful they are, but that might be his answer to Boros' energy blast that he does from his chest when he like releases his internal energy. So now that we have a rough idea about their strength just from a physical aspect, let's go into their speed, because we know Boros is one of the fastest, if not the fastest characters besides Saitama that we have seen so far. So in his released form, when he's competing against Saitama, we don't really have a good measurement of how fast he's moving. We could just kind of guess off of the visual context. But in my opinion, it's very similar to what we see Flashy Flash do against Saitama recently in chapter 113 of the webcomic. So now, when Flashy Flash is like connecting with Saitama and using his techniques on him, it doesn't really do anything. As to where when Boros connects with Saitama, he's sending him all over the place and, you know, landing marks on him and stuff. But I think that's just showing the difference in power, of course, between Boros and Flashy Flash. But the speed, the dynamics of it is very similar. I mean, Saitama seemingly trying to touch Flashy Flash is unable to. Now granted, in the end of their little sparring exchange, Saitama is going to get the better of Flashy Flash, but Genos interrupts it, and it's over. But before that, Saitama wasn't able to touch Flashy Flash. But it also goes into how hard was he trying, but also how hard was he trying against Boros. Because we never really know with Saitama, but I'm just going off of what we see here, and I honestly do think that released Boros' performance is very similar to that of what we saw of Flashy Flash in chapter 113. So with all of that being said, we also know that Blast defeated the strongest ninja in history, the dark leader of the ninjas, and put him in a coma. So I'm just going to assume that at the minimum, the strongest ninja in history, one that the other ninjas, including Hellfire and Gale, see as like some deity-like figure and they regard him as the strongest ever. I'm going to assume that at the minimum, he's just as fast as Flashy Flash. I mean, don't you think that's fair to assume? Now, him being the strongest ever and Flashy Flash not getting that title might mean that he is faster and stronger than Flashy Flash. Just taking a guess here. We don't know for sure yet. But we do know that Blast was able to defeat this guy and put him in a coma that lasted like 15 years. So I'm going to assume that means that Blast is pretty fast himself if he's able to compete with the strongest ninja ever. And we know that ninjas are all about speed. That's like their prerequisite of their skills and whatnot. So I think it's fair to assume that the quote-unquote strongest ninja ever is probably the fastest ninja ever as well, meaning that Blast is ridiculously fast in his own right, which means that he could probably keep up with Boros in the speed department. And also, Superman is pretty fast too, so if we're going back to the allegory thing, he's not only going to be having a similar strength to Superman, but probably a similar speed as well. So the real difficult thing to answer here is if Blast could deal with Meteoric Burst, because we know that Meteoric Burst is the highest form of power that Boros has, and I've only really been comparing feats to what we have seen from released Boros, and obviously Meteoric Burst takes that to the next level. So is Blast trying his hardest, maybe on the level of Meteoric Burst? Well, there's no real way to know for sure, but we could just assume that maybe he could. You know, just take it a guess. Like, if someone with the feats of Blast and the hyped exposition behind him, trying his hardest at his full power, in theory could be similar to what we have seen of Meteoric Burst Boros. But that also brings us to the next question of, let's just say Meteoric Burst Boros decides to use the Collapsing Star Roaring Cannon. You know, we just got to put it out there. There's no real reason why he would use it, but he does have it. He is capable of using it, so it needs to be proposed. Could Blast deal with this? And that's another unknown. Like, could he defend against it in his own way? I mean, he's obviously not going to punch it away because only really Saitama could do that, at least as far as we know. But maybe, I don't think his Eye Blasts could deal with that. It doesn't seem like his Eye Blasts have the same kind of planet-busting power that the Collapsing Star Roaring Cannon does. But could Blast deal with it in some other way? It is unknown at this point, so we're just going to have to leave that on the table for now. So before I go into my conclusion, I just want to say that given all of the information that we've gone over so far, I think it's fair to say that Blast and Boros are pretty relative in power. Just take it a guess, of course, but if you go off of the feats and the performances and comparing them like we have, I mean, don't you think it's not too outlandish to come up with the reasoning that I have? But in conclusion, I'm just going to say that Blast is probably stronger than Boros. I mean, aside from all of the stuff that we've talked about, I also speculate that Blast is going to be fighting Saitama. More so that he's going to be Saitama's next big fight in the series. Like, the first one was Boros, then we had Awakened Garo, and I think the third one is going to be Blast. And due to that, and you know, the progression of the story and characters need to get stronger for the stakes to raise and for Saitama to have a tougher fight, that might mean that Blast is stronger than Boros, because he's going to have to give Saitama a tougher fight than Boros to make the story more interesting. So just off of that, it could mean that Blast is stronger than Boros. Also, he might be the allegory for friggin' Superman, and Superman's insane. I mean, regardless of the iteration of him, just the idea of Superman is crazy, and I assume that Blast is probably going to be crazy as well.
Boros and Orochi are the two big bads of the manga, and both stand atop of the power scale of the series, at least for the villains. But who is the stronger of the two? Meaning that who is the strongest villain in the series, at least in the manga currently? Well, in this video we're going to be talking about that, so let's get into it. So when Arochi was originally introduced into the series, there was a lot of mystery around him. We didn't really know much until actually recently, but in that time we always had the question looming of who is stronger between him and Boros, because it's only natural that we're going to think this, since, like I said, they are the two big bads of the series, and no one else has really come close to them as of yet. And in the meantime, we always assumed that Boros was just naturally going to be stronger, since it's really difficult for someone to come close to the unfair level of power that Boros has. However, with the developments of Chapter 108, things have really come to light as to the exact power of Arochi, something that really eluded us up until now. So now I think is the good time to answer the question of who is stronger between
Boros and Orochi. So real quick, let me just break down these two characters and explain why they are so powerful. So Boros is the proclaimed dominator of the universe. It's implied that he's like the Saitama outside of Earth, like no one has ever really challenged him. And it's because he's coming from a race of aliens that are already inherently crazy powerful. Like the world that they come from is like apocalyptic, and it's like volcanoes and hellfire all the time, so they had to adapt. And that's how they became so crazy powerful. And it just so happens that Boros is the strongest of the strong aliens. He's kind of like the Thanos of this world. But it's also implied that he trained on top of being extremely talented. So those two lethal combinations made him insanely powerful the way that he is. Arochi, on the other hand, was born as a human. And once he is encountered by Giro, she reveals that he, just like Boros, had the inherent talent and potential to become really powerful. Like way more so than a typical human in the world of One Punch Man. And she puts him through a whole bunch of experiments that lead him to becoming a monster originally. But after that, in order to break through the plateau that all monsters seem to hit in this world, she puts him through the process of coming extremely close to death, surviving it, and repeating that process in order to break through the limits that are originally set by whatever the monstrification process is in this world. So just like Garo and Saitama, Giro used this process on Arochi to make him stronger than pretty much every other character in this series, and it also explains why Arochi became so big and gained so many abilities that he currently has, and it's because the further evolvements to his form after coming back from death every time made him bigger and more powerful. So now let's try our best to compare their feats, because I think this is going to be our best shot at figuring out who is stronger among the two. So I'm going to be mainly comparing released Boros, or Boros Unleashed. This is like his second form, the one that we see him take after his armor comes off, you know, the blue with all of the white electricity and the pink hair. I'm going to be comparing him to the Arochi that we see from chapter 108. Like the streamlined one, we don't get a name on this form of Arochi actually, so I'm just going to call it his true form, the one we see him take when he's really ready to fight Saitama seriously. So conveniently, they both fought Saitama, so that's going to make it easier to compare here, but also coincidentally, they both lose one of their arms in their fight, so we don't see Boros lose his arm. It happens off panel, but we can just assume that he loses it in a similar way as Arochi. So Arochi throws one of his one-armed water stream rock smashing fists at Saitama, and it doesn't work out, and his arm comes off after Saitama punches it. So I don't really know if it's fair to compare the durability here, as like I said, Arochi is bigger than Boros. So it's difficult to really figure out if one punch was more significant than the other, or if Saitama was trying harder against one or the other. But regardless, still pretty impressive that they could simply just take a strike from Saitama regardless of where it is, and they could still function afterwards. So Boros kind of has one up on Arochi here, because he originally does take a strike from Saitama when we first see him, when he's in his armored form. And he does live, doesn't really seem to take much damage from it. So does this more so the armor that Boros had, or is it more so indicative of his crazy tankiness that he has? I think it's probably going to be the latter here, but maybe it's still not fair to compare these feats, because we don't really ever see Arochi take a strike from Saitama to his solar plexus the way that we saw Boros take it. And also, the final punch that Saitama does to Arochi that quote-unquote kills him seems to be way higher of an effort of a strike than what he originally does to Boros. Like, when he punches Boros in his armored form, it's kind of just like a nonchalant punch, nothing like what we see from chapter 108. So I guess it's still unclear right now who has more durability, but we can go into speed at this point, because I'm just going to say right now that Boros is way faster than Arochi, especially in his released form. That doesn't mean that Arochi is slow by any means. He's very fast, actually. Pretty impressively fast considering how big he is. So his speed feats in chapter 92 against Garo really put that on display, but The only real clear speed feat, and I'm not even sure if it is a speed feat, but it seems that way, in his fight against Saitama from chapter 108. So towards the end of the chapter, after Arochi sends his head horn dragons at Saitama and they engulf him and he breaks out of it, we see Saitama cock his arm back, and in the following panel, we see him throw the punch. But Arochi is able to avoid it and wind up above Saitama. So that means, I guess he's fast enough to avoid a lackadaisical punch or just like a standard punch from Saitama. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but still, it is a speed feat kind of, and it's showing that he can hang, but still, nothing compared to the speed feats we see of released Boros from chapter 35. So I think their durability more or less could be considered the same at this point, and their speed, not so much. Boros, definitely faster of the two in my opinion. So let's compare their strength. This is another one that I think is more or less equal, so we don't really have many defining strength feats from Orochi and released Boros, but just based off of what they can do, I'm going to assume that, more or less, they're probably physically the same in strength. Maybe one is a little more than the other, but there's not a clear discrepancy in my opinion. So now let's compare their energy, fire, blast, whatever these things are, the two projectiles that they show in their respective battles with Saitama. I think this is the most important thing to compare amongst these two in order to really accurately assess who is stronger, at least when comparing released Boros to the true form of Arochi. So the blast, the released energy that Boros shoots from the eye in his chest in chapter 35 at Saitama, pretty impressive. However, it's not as big as the crazy one-armed blast that Arochi does to Saitama in chapter 108, but their output, their damage output seems to be comparable. It's difficult to compare them because Orochi's blast is happening underground, and Boros' blast is happening on top of a spaceship. So I'm going to try my best to compare these two, but based off of what I saw, they seem to be comparable in damage output. So like I said, Orochi's blast, of course, way bigger than what we see of Orochi's, but the end results, I don't know. So Boros' blast, the output of it, the end result, the collateral damage, the destruction of it, is only seen from the perspective of the top of Boros' ship. But if we compare that vicinity to the city beneath it, it looks like this one blast from Boros maybe can destroy an eighth of the city that they're above. Maybe less than that, maybe a little more than that. And in chapter 108, when we see Orochi's blast, it seems similar, the damage output, because, like I said, we only see it underground, but there is tremors above the surface, the ground implodes and takes out a good chunk of the scenery that we see, which I guess is an eighth of the city. I don't know, maybe less, maybe more. But we also see the crater underground, from the perspective of the subway car, and it's friggin' gigantic. But still, there's not a clear-cut difference between which beam or energy blast here seems to be stronger than the other. So I'm just gonna say they're comparable. However, when Arochi decides to go all out and uses all of his dragon mouths and all of his beams, including the one in his chest at once, there is no question at that point. Clearly, it is bigger and I think implied to be stronger than just one singular chest blast from Boros in chapter 35. So I'm going to give Arochi the edge there on that. I mean, come on. I think it would be unfair to say that Boros' chest blast is stronger than a full-on every mouth shooting a blast out from Arochi. So that about does it. Now let's go over everything we talked about and try to come up with a conclusion here. So between the two, I have their durability about even. I have a clear speed advantage to Boros. I mean, he's way too fast, for almost anyone. The strength is about even, and the energy blast factor, I'm going to give that to Arochi. He really excels at that. I mean, it's more evident than ever from chapter 108, but it was clearly on display in chapter 92 as well. But other than that, who would win if they were to fight? And I think the fight would be super competitive. Like, neither of these guys would low diff the other. It would be very high diff for either one. But I'm not entirely sure, because, like, clearly Boros is faster, so can he evade the fire beams forever? But we also have to remember that Arochi is a martial arts master and a genius at that. He has the same copying ability that Garo does, and he also has the Water Stream Rock Smashing Fist in his arsenal. So would that be enough to eventually overcome Boros, or would Boros just be too strong in the end for him? Well, right now I'm going to say the fight is more or less even between these two. I can't pick a winner. But that's going to bring me to the final part of this video, and it's talking about Meteor Burst Boros. So yeah, this is a thing that we can't forget about, and you might have been yelling at the screen at me telling me to talk about this, but I didn't forget about it. I just really wanted to go over the comparable things and abilities that these two characters have, rather than just outright saying, hey, Boros is stronger than Orochi because he can use Meteoric Burst. Yes, that is true, but Meteoric Burst is like the last result of Boros. It's not like he's just going to casually go into it and fight someone. Like, you have to earn this. You have to push Boros to be able to use the Meteoric Burst, because once he gets to it, he says that it puts a lot of stress on his body, so he only uses it in order to end the fights fast. But at that point, I mean, he's really approaching disaster level god, and he's easily the strongest villain / character we have seen besides Saitama in the entire series. In my opinion, no one is really coming close to Meteoric Burst Boros. He's definitely the fastest, the strongest, the most durable of all of the characters. I mean, he took a consecutive normal punch from Saitama and lived to tell the tale. He took a normal punch from him, or at least what we assume is a normal punch, and only went back a couple feet. He has the insane regeneration ability. And I guess we could talk about the Collapsing Star Roaring Cannon, although I don't really think it's fair to compare it to Orochi's Collective Blast, because the Collapsing Star Roaring Cannon is like the final move of Boros. It takes all of his energy to accomplish this move, but still, it's really way above everything that we have seen of Arochi from Chapter 108, so yeah, in the end, Boros is stronger than Arochi, but he needs to go into his Meteoric Burst form for that to happen. But before that, I think it's really anyone's game at that point.
Alright, we're doing it. Tatsumaki versus Boros, but specifically released Boros, like the Boros after his armor comes off with the pink hair and the bluish tone to him, which means that we're not going to be talking about Meteoric Burst in this one. So a lot of the times when we have like these hypothetical matchups with like Boros or a Boros discussion of any sort, it usually ends with people saying it's going to be a wash. And hey, I'm guilty of that too. I love the guy, one of my favorite characters, and he's outrageous, as we're going to talk about in this video. But people just say that like, oh well, nobody can really compete against him except like Saitama, of course, and then guys like on the level of Blast and Arochi and maybe the full potential of Metal Knight. But that's pretty much it. But I feel like Tatsumaki's name should probably be thrown into that discussion as well. Now, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of people out there who also feel this way. There are plenty of people that defend Tatsumaki and say that she could probably take on guys like Boros. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at in this video. Could she compete against him, or could she even defeat him? But unfortunately, in order for me to go in depth into Tatsumaki, I'm going to have to go into webcomic spoilers. So if you don't want to know what's going to happen, I suggest to check out now. So Tatsumaki's already taken on at least 2 guys around the level of Boros, and then of course she fought Saitama, and we'll compare those as well. But as for Golden S, he's like fringe above Dragon, maybe could be that level, just in my opinion at least. I feel like the verdict is out on him, at least until we see his manga feats. And then Awakened Garo is consensus above Dragon. I mean, hell, some people even consider him to be disaster level god. But that's kind of showing us that she can at least compete with these guys. But also, she was weakened during both of those fights, even against Saitama. And it's mentioned multiple times that this damage to her, this weakness, is hindering her powers, almost drastically in a way. And that goes on to what one said when he commented on what would happen if Tatsumaki were to fight Golden S at full power. He says that at her best shape, she could have beaten Golden S. So does that mean for sure 10 times out of 10 she would have beat him? I don't know. It's really up for you to decide.
but that is still giving us some insight into how powerful she was at her full power if she were to take on somebody of that magnitude. Now also, even still while weakened, she was able to hold Awakened Garo still for a few seconds, like long enough for a My Master to come in and land 25 kicks on him. Very impressive, even her still being at the state of power that she was. But she says something very interesting. She says that, after she's holding him, that if her brain was unharmed, that it would only take her 5 seconds to take out Awakened Garo. Now, is this her being braggadocious? It's really up for you to decide the validity of it, but I still think that's kind of giving us some insight because it's lining up with what one said about Golden S. So how powerful is Golden S really? Just is really going to give us a ballpark of her going against somebody like released Boros. So first of all, he's ultra fast. How fast is he? It's hard to say, but we can only really go off of the reactions that the S-Class gives him and what his feats are. So immediately he does the Ultra Instinct Goku move to her, the Raging Demon from Akuma. He does that crazy thing that whenever a character is super fast and super powerful, they are able to achieve this feat. So it shocks the S-Class when he does this, so I think that's very telling. Zombie Man says he's so fast our eyes cannot track him. Now, Zombie Man, obviously not one of the most powerful S-Class heroes, but I think that's narration letting us know that he is indeed pretty fast, even for like S-Class levels of speed. And then a My Mask, of course, the most staunch of them all probably, says that Golden S is a monster we cannot defeat. Even if we all went full out, it's still going to be no easy task. So aside from that, we also see him able to go against Pre-Will Garo. This is like peak Pre-Will Garo, ridiculously powerful. But he's able to fight against him essentially full force. And one depicted this fight as like a typical Dragon Ball Z fight, like just lines indicating how fast they're moving and you don't really get to see it. But that's showing that, yeah, they're moving at outrageous speeds. And also by the end of the fight, Garo is Awakened Garo, indicating that Golden S pushed him to the point of awakening. So that's showing that he's that powerful. But of course, he did die to Awakened Garo, so he's not quite on that level. So this means that Tatsumaki can defeat somebody like Golden S, which I think is telling us that she could go against released Boros. Now, Golden S isn't as strong as him, in my opinion, but given the hype and the feats that Golden S has, at least just in the webcomic, I think he's close to that level. Like just a weaker version, more or less, of released Boros. So that means that her overall strength, durability, speed, reflexes are able to compete with him. And let's go into her reflexes. So if we go back to that Raging Demon, Ultra Instinct type technique that Golden S did to her, afterwards, she's still standing. Like, she's not dead after taking that massive attack. Golden S says, "Pretty astounding, you're still alive. Did you erect a barrier to save yourself?" So that means in the blink of an eye, even faster than that, before he was able to hit her with the Raging Demon technique, she was able to put up a barrier. So that's showing us that her reflexes and her barrier are top notch. And I feel that these are probably strong enough to at least save her from taking the full force of Boros' punches. Now, she can take a punch and she can take some damage because we've seen, she took a punch to the face from Pure Ugly and that didn't put her down for good. And she was thrown like from the sky directly into the ground by Psychos. And then after that, she was like thrown around like into rocks and stuff by Psychos. And then after that, she was down for a few chapters, like didn't get up or anything. So I don't think she'd be able to take a few punches from Boros like straight on without her barrier. But how strong is her barrier? So we've seen that it's strong enough to like block buildings from falling on her. Like the barrier can even become so big it like reaches city blocks level. And it's able to withstand the force of the full power light sphere from Homeless Emperor. That's pretty impressive. Like, didn't really do anything to her. And Homeless Emperor himself says they are full power. So does this mean that she could withstand like an energy blast from Boros? Because, that's something that he could do in this form. And I think maybe. I mean, I think they're stronger than Homeless Emperor's full power, but by how much, it's really hard to say. I mean, we do get a glimpse at the area of damage that this thing is capable of doing. If, like, we're comparing the top of the ship to, like, the radius of the city, it's pretty devastating. But just given the potential of a full power Tatsumaki, and how Homeless Emperor's Blast didn't really do anything to it, I think she could at least take one of those. So she can survive at least one of those. But how fast is she overall? Because we saw Boros is ridiculously fast. So there's no real way to tell for sure how fast Boros is in its released form. But I could just say, just in my opinion, that I feel that he's at least as fast as Flashy Flash. Given the way that he's competing with Saitama in their fight, and if we also compare it to the fight between, or the sparring match, between Saitama and Flashy Flash in Chapter 113 of the webcomic, it's pretty comparable, in my opinion. Like, they're doing similar stuff, and I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that Flashy Flash is at least close to what Boros was doing, at least from a speed perspective. So can Tatsumaki deal with this speed? Well, from a mobility standpoint, probably not. That doesn't mean she's slow. I mean, we saw how fast she could fly from like city to city or just point to point when she was trying to save Fubuki from Super S and when she was going after the hot dog monster. But from a reflex stance, which I think is the most important part here, I think she can. I mean, if she can block the Raging Demon before it's like hitting her full force, and that was in her weakened state, I think at her full power, she probably could block Boros' attacks, or at least compete with it from a reflex stance. Also, she's just going to have her barrier erect at all times, so that's to her advantage, especially against somebody like Boros, who is ultra aggressive, like the most aggressive I think we have ever seen. So, can Tatsumaki manipulate Boros? Can she use her Esper powers on him? Well, she can like throw stuff at him for sure, but we saw how that, went against guys like Awakened Garo. It doesn't really matter. So she's gonna have to like manipulate his body the way that she was holding Awakened Garo still, the way that she was trying to break Golden S's neck. So apparently there is a technique where you disturb the opponent's surrounding psychic signal, and if you use it on the opponent's body, you can end things in an instant, such as like breaking their neck or doing something like that. But even non-psychics have energy flowing throughout their body, and scholars call it things like chi or aura. And we've seen that Boros has like the most outrageous display of this we have ever seen outside of Saitama, of course. I mean, the energy is just flowing out of his body. I mean, that's what he's all about. He just has this crazy internal energy to him. Now, that could be his chi, that could be his aura, but regardless, he does have something like it. And then the strength of will is directly connected to psychic resistance. So we see that when Tatsumaki tries to use this on Saitama, it kind of just vibrates him slightly, and he says that his muscles are twitching on their own. So yeah, that's Saitama, but she's at least able to lift him with this ability, which is ultra impressive, because it is Saitama after all. And he makes a clear distinction between it being wind pressure and like him being psychically lifted. So then she also compares this to when she tried to use it on Golden S at Awakened Garo. Now, of course, she was weakened during those times, so at her full strength, her being able to defeat Golden S and her claim of taking care of Awakened Garo in 5 seconds, I think that she could probably use this on released Boros. I mean, yes, he probably does have insane strength of will, probably, which ties to his psychic resistance. But given her potential, and given what we've seen of him, I don't feel like there's that big of a discrepancy between them. I do think that she could probably mess up Boros for a little bit with this stuff. I mean, let's just look at some of her feats of strength. Like, she pulls the Monster Association out of the ground. Murata claims that she's strong enough to lift Z City. That could be hyperbole, but still it's something. She stops those bullets coming down from Boros' ship. She swats away the evil Natural Water's water jets. She can withstand Giro's 300 times gravity attack. So I think she could probably manipulate Boros and do some damage to him. I mean, why not? Do you think that like he's just so unfathomably powerful that not even Tatsumaki, given her strength feats, given that she could defeat Golden S at her full power, couldn't do anything to him from this stance? Like, I do think she can amount this offense to him, but it really depends on how effective it would be. Like, could she snap his neck? Maybe, maybe not. Could she throw him around? I think very likely. Could she, like, hurl him into something? For sure. Could she damage him that way? Remains to be seen. But it really all depends on if she can compete with his speed and if he can break her barrier. So can his physical punches do it? Probably. I mean, we saw how powerful they were. He knocked Saitama through, like, multiple layers of the ship, punches him through everything. And we don't really get to see too clearly how physically strong he is, not going into Meteor Burst stuff, but just him leveling Saitama is pretty indicative of what his crazy strength is, which is probably stronger than like Darkshine, just taking a guess. So all in all, I feel like Tatsumaki versus Boros from a released state is pretty competitive, like way more competitive than what you think it would be. Who would win? If I had to put my money on it, I would put it on Boros, because he just seems like he would be able to overcome her in more ways that she can overcome him. But I really wouldn't be surprised if Tatsumaki was able to like take him out with like psychic manipulation, or could gas him out from taking all of his best shots and he wasn't able to break her barrier or something like that. I feel like it's like 60-40 in Boros' favor at this point, but it's really up for you to decide.
There's going to be spoilers in these questions and answers, so let's get into it. John Doe asks, I was thinking as a distant possibility, what if Boros was somehow brought into the Neo Heroes arc on one of the sides, and the reasoning being it's not made clear whether Boros was really dead, we just saw his body in the rubble, and as far as we know, Metal Knight could have salvaged his body and maybe saved him or something of that sort. And just like Garo is still hanging around after being defeated, and Suiryu also being in the arc, I feel like it's a plausible way to actually pit Boros against the other characters that aren't Saitama. Would also follow the trend of the strong antagonists / opponents of Saitama respecting and admiring his strength. Suiryu, Garo, Orochi, all not knowing but actually acknowledge and respect him. So I think it's a possibility that Boros could come back, but not a strong one. Like, the odds are slim, but it's realistic that it could possibly happen. And I actually made a video about this last year, talking about Metal Knight possibly salvaging his body from the wreckage of the ship. So it is true, we don't really see what happens to Boros after Saitama walks away from him. Yes, he does talk, but we kind of just assume that he's dead because the core of the ship like explodes after that whole sequence, and then the ship falls, and then Boros is, his body, his torso is still on the ship. So I guess we're led to believe that that is him dying, and then when the ship falls, it's like his body is getting destroyed by that as well. So I think that's where it's going. But there is, like I said, a small chance that Metal Knight could have found his body, because we know that Metal Knight has salvaged the ship, and he is currently working on it, and that is a big mystery that has yet to be touched on again since it was revealed. That would be awesome if he brought back Boros as a cyborg or something, but I just don't think it's going there. I would love it if it happened. I would pay for this to happen, honestly, but I just think Metal Knight's, his big overarching threat that he poses is just his arsenal, and he probably has some crazy-ass single robots that are made from Boros' ship that are probably just as powerful as Boros, and we're likely going to see that happen, as opposed to Boros coming back as a cyborg. But like I said, I would be on board for it, but it just seems like the odds of it happening are slim.
Okay, I know it's been a long time, guys, but it's finally here, because we're talking about Boros versus Awakened Garo, baby. This is like the match of matches. This is the main event of WrestleMania, pretty much. But also, this is super contentious. Maybe the most contentious matchup in all of the One Punch Man community, possibly. And this is like pretty much straight up 50-50, like a pick-em matchup. It is ultimately up for you to decide, so keep that in mind, because your opinion is probably going to differ from mine. Another caveat here is that we're going off of two different continuities to compare these two characters. So just, keep that in mind as well, because we're going to be comparing manga Boros to webcomic Awakened Garo. And that is because Awakened Garo has not reached the manga yet, obviously. Maybe in a year he will. I don't know. And let me also put it out there that when Awakened Garo is, fully completes his run in the manga, I will make a rematch video to this, like a round 2, because obviously, we're going to have to take another look at Boros versus Garo at that point. So just keep that in mind. This is just round 1. There will be another video in like a year and a half or something like that. But anyway, you guys definitely want me to take a look at manga Boros instead of webcomic Boros, right? Because, what manga Boros is the one that we've all come to know and love. But he is way more impressive than webcomic Boros. Now, webcomic Boros, he still has like the same type of durability and all that good stuff. He's just a really condensed version of what we see in the manga, because it is extremely extrapolated in the manga, the Boros in there, and then the anime takes it even further than that. So I'm going to be, using the manga version, because that's what we want to see going against Awakened Garo here. But it's kind of putting Awakened Garo at a handicap at the same time, because he is going to be restricted by the webcomics continuity, as well as like the art style and the feats within it and everything. So I'm going to keep this matchup
as within their own continuities as much as I can. So when I'm drawing from like pre-Awakened Garo feats, I'm just going to go with the webcomic. And when I'm comparing stuff with Boros, within his own continuity, the manga, it's going to stay there as well. Try to do this as best as I can to keep it, as fair as we can. Like I said, Awakened Garo is pretty much, you're still at a handicap here. All right, so now let's get into the most important bit of information regarding this matchup, because thankfully, the creator, one himself, actually made a comment on this exact fight, because he said that Garo or Boros, who would win? Before, Boros was definitely the stronger one, but Garo is now a near-perfect monster. I don't really know. A good matchup. I do believe Garo is stronger in close combat, where things like punches and kicks can generally be avoided. So that's awesome. When he says, Boros was definitely the stronger one before, I think he's referring to like peak Red Garo pretty much, like the Garo that went against Darkshine and Golden S. That, without a doubt, is true. Boros is definitely stronger than that version of Garo. But then he says, but Garo is now a near-perfect monster. So now he's talking about Awakened Garo, meaning that, in my opinion, the previous statement is no longer valid. Like, they're kind of like on the same level at this point, more or less. Same tier is a better way of putting it. And then he says, I don't really know a good matchup. So that right there, I think, is going back to what I was talking about in the beginning, about how this is like a super subjective matchup, guys. Like, not even the creator has like, a clear-cut, quick answer that comes to his mind that could be objective or anything like that. It's even up in the air for him. And of course, he acknowledges that it's a good matchup, because it is. It's extremely competitive. However, he goes on to say, I do believe Garo is stronger in close combat, where things like punches and kicks can generally be avoided. And then that's where that whole thing ends. It's just a thing praising Garo and not praising Boros. So that's interesting. But this is also true. Because, one said it, of course it's true. But I'm just saying, it's like, I see why this is true. Because Garo's course is stronger in close combat, where things like punches and kicks can generally be avoided, which also means that I think one is confirming here that Garo would definitely be able to avoid the strikes of Boros in a close exchange. And also, Boros is not the skilled martial artist that Garo is. Not even close. Boros is just like a crazy blitzing athletic type. Like, if you'll notice, Boros never blocks when he's fighting Saitama. He never guards, never dodges, nothing like that. Just straight at you, berserker, kill or be killed. It's awesome. And that's perfect for Garo, really, because that's where he excels, is going against these type of individuals. But again, he's never dealt with somebody quite on the level of Boros, which is going into the whole narrative that Saitama presented him with, where it's like, no matter how skilled you are, if you are just so overwhelmingly powerful, you can just overcome pretty much anything. And I'm not saying that's what would happen with Boros here, but I'm saying that he's pushing that boundary. So with that being said, let's just get straight into the battle, and we're going, immediately to the peak of their powers. We're going to have Meteor Burst Boros here going against Abandonment Awakened Garo. That, in my opinion, is their two peaks. You might think that, what Garo does at the end of his fight against Saitama is his peak, but it is not. I'll talk about that at the end of the video, so just wait until then. But for now, Abandonment Awakened Garo versus Meteor Burst Boros. This is the fight. Now, how fast is Meteor Burst Boros exactly? It's hard to say. Both of these guys have already established that they're pretty much faster than Flashy Flash. So we're just dealing with the highest percentile. And it's going to come down to a battle of inches. But it's one way to compare these, I guess, the speed of these two is with Saitama's reactions, how shocked he is. So when Meteor Burst Boros launches off the ground at Saitama initially, Saitama is pretty much shocked by the level of speed that he's showing here. And that's the best way I can say it. I mean, look at it for yourself. He's like, oh my god, he is so fast. So that's how fast Meteor Burst Boros is. Way faster than Flashy Flash, because he obviously doesn't give that the reaction to the Flashy Slash. Something that made time look like it was stopping. So yeah, he's that fast, okay? Now, Thankfully, Saitama also kind of gives this reaction to Awakened Garo as well. Now, it's not in the same exact context as to where, like, you know, Boros was sprinting off the ground. But Awakened Garo is, like, evading Saitama's strikes here, like what I was just talking about. Like, after he does the abandonment, like, Saitama's, like, can't really land anything on him. It's super impressive, and he's giving him a similar reaction of, like, oh my god, I can't believe he's doing this. He's, like, shocked. Now, it's Saitama after all, so, you know, take it for a grain of salt. But I think comparing these two is still putting them in the same kind of tier of speed as to where maybe Meteor Burst Boros is overall faster than Awakened Garo, like movement and everything. But I think Awakened Garo, after using the abandonment, is fast enough to still evade Meteor Burst Boros' strikes and counter them and everything, despite maybe being a little slower than him. So now let's get into, like, when strikes start getting landed on each other, because I do think, you know, Meteor Burst Boros can eventually hit Awakened Garo. I mean, why not? But I'll get more into that later on. But we're just basically going to go over their, you know, comparing their strength here, because Awakened Garo is obviously going to be hitting Meteor Burst Boros. We established he does not block, so he's going to be taking a lot of shots here. But, you know, Awakened Garo, on the other hand, will be taking some as well. It will not be a perfect fight for him, in my opinion, when we're dealing with the speed and the athleticism of Meteor Burst Boros. But anyway, this is where the handicap is going to come into play big time. The one that I was talking about at the beginning between the webcomic and the manga, because the strength difference between them is huge. Meteor Burst Boros is so much stronger than Garo, in my opinion, that, like, this is going to be the deciding factor in the matchup. Now, this also brings me to the other huge contentious point of this matchup that really makes it difficult to analyze, more so than it already was, and that is Awakened Garo is holding back against Saitama, and Saitama is holding back against Awakened Garo, meaning that we'll never know the full strength of Awakened Garo, and we'll never know his full durability, because we'll never see him take the same kind of punch that Boros took from Saitama, which obviously had killing intent behind it. And as for, you know, well, with his strength, he never gives Saitama a blow with lethal intent behind it either, or even just full power, we can assume, or I don't know, it's never implied that he does, so we'll never truly know. But if we're strictly just comparing them landing shots on Saitama, there is a huge difference between them. Like, Boros is, like, leveling Saitama here, sending him all over the place. Even before Meteor Burst Boros, he was leveling him, and now his strength has just gone so high. Like, just like seeing what his punch does, like, from a bird's eye view, like the level of damage that it has and the widespread effect of it, it's similar to, like, when he was firing off one of his energy blasts when he was, like, in his released form. I mean, it's not the same, but it's, like, similar. And if we're comparing that to the city, just like we did with the energy blast, he's just one of his punches is, like, leveling, like, a portion of a city. Like, it's crazy how powerful that is. And maybe Awakened Garo could do that in theory, but he never shows any kind of strength like this against Saitama. Also, going to the moon kick, Meteor Burst Boros kicked Saitama to the friggin' moon. Now, that means that he's strong enough to kick beings off the planet, meaning that, in theory, he could kick Awakened Garo off the planet. I'm not saying that it's guaranteed he would, but it definitely is something to think about in this matchup. How would Awakened Garo deal with that? I don't know. Could he come back to the planet? Maybe, maybe not, but Awakened Garo has not shown any kind of ability to be knocking beings off the planet. I mean, maybe he could, and it's like, it's too bad, because it's like I said, handicap from the webcomic, most likely Murata does things way more extreme than one. But comparing this, I mean, it's just, in my opinion, fair to say that Meteor Burst Boros is way more physically powerful than Awakened Garo, and Awakened Garo, the level of physical strength that he's showing here is definitely above Dragon and very impressive, but it might not be enough to take down Meteor Burst Boros for good, because we're just going to come to their durabilities here, because this is going to be the deciding factor, like who can take whose shots. Now, Meteor Burst Boros takes, I don't know, probably the best punch we've seen anyone so far take from Saitama. Like, when he gets hit by him like towards the end of their fight and he just gets sent back a couple feet and then keeps going. Like in the current meta of One Punch Man, that's, I guess, as impressive as you can get. So it's like, replace that with Awakened Garo. Now, Awakened Garo is going to need to replicate a strike as powerful as that to get that kind of reaction out of Meteor Burst Boros. So now, do you think that Awakened Garo can replicate the power of what we can assume to be a normal punch from Saitama here, maybe? Maybe he can. Maybe he can't, but that still means that he needs to go above and beyond that. He needs to do something even stronger than that. So then when we go to something stronger than that, we see the consecutive normal punches. Okay, so Saitama doing that, obviously, you know, it's pretty much the strongest thing ever. It reduces Meteor Burst Boros to mush. But that's when his crazy regeneration ability kicks in and he comes back to normal. So, can the God Slayer instant attack, pretty much, you know, Awakened Garo's ultimate attack, can that reduce Boros to mush here? Meaning that is the God Slayer instant attack as powerful as Saitama's consecutive normal punches? I don't know. I would say that it's probably not fair to say it's that strong. I would say that it's definitely stronger than what pretty much maybe any S-class hero could do outside of Blast, and it's on the level of above Dragon, but man, to say that the instant attack is as powerful as the consecutive normal punches is might be too much of a leap at this point, just in my opinion. And it's looking like that's the type of power that you're going to need to be able to take out Boros here. Now, going to Awakened Garo, it brings us back to Saitama holding back against him. And like I said, he never gives him a true like punch with killing intent like he gave to Boros. So all of the punches that Awakened Garo takes from Saitama are, I guess we could say, just not as impressive as the one that Meteor Burst Boros or just released Boros are taking. So, does that mean that Awakened Garo's durability, it's really not going to be able to stand up to somebody like Meteor Burst Boros that long? I think he could definitely take a few shots from Meteor Burst Boros. Why not? But man, how many? Because obviously he can keep going. Garo has like crazy endurance, like some of the highest endurance we'll ever see in the series probably, but he can be defeated. Like you can just put Garo down for good. It's not like he's unbeatable. Like you can stop him before he accelerates his growth mechanism. And I'm going to talk about that at the end. Don't worry, you know, the monster stuff that he does against Saitama towards the end of their fight. But before I wrap up my initial, like, you know, first level decision on this fight, let me just take a look at Boros' energy blast as well, because I know you guys probably want me to look at that as well. It's never really shown that Meteor Burst Boros can do this. Like, the only kind of energy projection he does is the collapsing star roaring cannon. And we'll talk about that too, don't worry. But even if he does that, like just the regular released Boros energy blast that, you know, we see that he does to Saitama, in either form, you know, I think that Awakened Garo can probably take it. I mean, why not? He was able to tank Rover's blasts in the webcomic, like when he was Red Garo, and he probably did it even more impressively than he did in the manga, honestly. I mean, tanking those blasts and then defeating Rover. Like, he defeats Rover in the webcomic, not in the manga. So it's actually, his durability might be working out a little better for him in this regard, you know, taking like blasts like that. So I don't think that would be too much of a problem in this matchup. And also, I don't think Boros would maybe use it too much because he'd see that Garo was a speedster and probably evade those pretty easily. So that being said, and with everything else I said about the power difference and everything, I think Meteor Burst Boros would defeat Awakened Garo, even using the abandonment. Now, I do think that he needs to become a Meteor Burst Boros to defeat him, for sure. And it's going to be competitive, and Garo's going to evade his strikes and everything, but it's eventually going to get to the point of where Awakened Garo is not going to be strong enough to put a Meteor Burst Boros down. Like, his durability is just going to be that good enough to, like, be able to hang with him long enough to where where Awakened Garo is not going to be able to absorb the same amount of damage that Meteoric Burst Boros is. Because remember, he's a Juggernaut, he's a Blitzer, he's just going to keep coming at you, he's not going to block, he's not going to stop. While, you know, Awakened Garo is like picking his shots, evading him, countering him. I just think that this is not going to work out for him. While it typically would, you know, in previous instances and previous opponents we've seen, but just I think Meteor Burst Boros is just too much. So now we're going to go into overtime at this point, because remember, there's two things that I still got to touch on. So at the end of Garo's fight with Saitama, his growth mechanism kicks in, the ability where he becomes stronger to match his opponent so he can overcome them. And we've seen him do this multiple times throughout the series, against Darkshine, Tank Top Master. And considering that Meteor Burst Boros, like I said, is going to be pushing him to the point of where he's probably going to be defeating him, then no doubt this ability is going to kick in against Meteor Burst Boros. I mean, why not? So once Garo starts to further evolve or whatever's going on with him, it's hard to say how much stronger he's becoming at this point. Because we don't really get to see too many feats from him. We definitely don't get to see his speed. We kind of get to see his power, I guess, but it's ambiguous. But his durability may be improved, maybe not. Now, Garo himself in this form says, I still can't reach you, talking about Saitama, even with this. Unbelievable. So I guess that's him acknowledging that he's definitely stronger than what he was previously. Now, his strength, how much stronger is he at this point? I don't know. Durability, Saitama's holding back. It's hard to say because he does hit him here and he doesn't get sent flying back like he was previously. This is similar to what Meteor Burst Boros was taking, but the whole holding back thing kind of muddles it, and it's hard to say for sure. And like I said, we don't see his speed at all, so we don't know what it's like. And then, of course, he further evolves after this. He gets his arm head-butted off, serious head-butted, so he's taking a serious move there, but also Saitama holding back. Still impressive nonetheless, and then he goes to the winged mode. And then we don't really get to see what he's capable of at that point, but we can assume that he's, much more powerful than he was beforehand. But what we can see here is that as Garo starts to go down this route of power increasement and more transformations, he's sacrificing his intelligence and skill for power, because by the time he becomes like the winged monster, he's just speaking in like 2-word sentences. So we can assume that once he starts transforming like this, he no longer has his skills and the intelligence and the wits and the cognizance that he did beforehand, possibly, right? So therefore, he's losing the entire edge that he had over Boros. So this is going to be even worse for him. So if he starts like forcefully evolving like this against Boros towards the end of their fight, he's just going to start becoming like a huge punching bag for Boros, in my opinion. Now, as for the collapsing star roaring cannon, this is another thing that gets brought up all the time in this matchup. People just say, well, Boros is going to use the collapsing star roaring cannon and he'll win. Or the other side will be he'll use it and then Garo will tank it or whatever. And that's fine. But I'm just going to say that, like, I don't think that would be a factor in this fight at all. Because we have to remember that, like, the collapsing star roaring cannon is Boros releasing all of his energy. It is like his trump card. It is his final thing to do. He's only going to use this if he has, like, an absolute reason to. It's either use the collapsing star roaring cannon or you lose and or die. And so far, I've established that he's probably not going to be pushed to that point against Garo. And even if he was, okay, let's just say hypothetically he uses the collapsing star roaring cannon on him, what's going to happen? Well, either Garo can tank it, or he doesn't, or he barely survives it. Either way, the Earth is being destroyed, right? I mean, unless he somehow shoots him at an angle, like Endeavor did to the High Nomu and shoots him into the sky, Boros ain't going to do that. Boros is going to shoot at the Earth too. So even if Garo does survive this, the Earth's gone, and then what? Is he going to survive in space? Maybe, maybe not. And then what's going on with Boros? Can Boros still fight after he's released all of his energy? It's like, I just think this is a moot point, honestly. It doesn't matter. We should just basically mainly look at their other attributes coming into this, aside from the collapsing star roaring cannon. But yeah, that's it for Boros versus Awakened Garo, everyone. I think Awakened Garo would lose to Meteor Burst Boros. He's just a little too much. But remember, we're going to wait for Awakened Garo's debut and then completion in the manga. And then we'll come back to this matchup in a rematch video. And I think Awakened Garo will probably win the rematch, knowing Murata.
Mr. Awesome asks, what if the Dark Matter Thieves invaded Season 1, Episode 1 of My Hero? Supposing that the heroes and villains are working together, could they win? If not, would Boros be satisfied? So this is going to be a tall order for the characters from My Hero Academia. So chronologically, in episode 1 of season 1, they have some pretty powerful characters at their disposal, heroes and villains, and in this scenario, you said they're working together to take down the Dark Matter Thieves. So All Might and All For One are going to be the two strongest, I assume they have at this point in time. And then maybe Captain Celebrity's out there. As far as I know, we still don't know what he's like current timeline within My Hero. I think Vigilantes we only seen like 5 years ago or something, so I don't know if he's still that powerful, but if he is even still alive,
then he can come help. They would definitely need him. He would be a seriously valuable asset to this battle. And then they have Endeavor and the rest of the Billboard heroes. So I'm thinking that this collection of heroes could maybe take down the generals, you know, Melzergard, Goribas, and Grugenshu. You know, it wouldn't be easy, of course, but they could probably get the job done there. Then, of course, we have Boros coming out, and it's not looking good at that point. So Boros, I mean, he's just so powerful compared to like the My Hero power scale that he would only need like 1 or 2 shots to take care of most characters. But like All Might, All for One working together, maybe, big maybe, they can push Boros to having his armor come off, and then fighting the released version of Boros. It's hard to say if they could win at that point. I mean, it's a possibility they could, but even if they somehow are able to push Boros to Meteor Burst form, then I think it's extremely unlikely that they're going to be able to win. So I guess that answers that. And as would Boros be satisfied? I don't know. I mean, does pushing him to Meteor Burst make him satisfied? But I guess you're led to believe that Boros, even having his armor removed, is somewhat satisfying, considering that he needs to apply himself, which, I don't know, it kind of seems like he hasn't really been challenged at all in his, you know, domination of the universe. So anyone who could push him that far maybe could be satisfying.
Shadowbat X asks, I have an interesting question. If Saitama were to fight Boros, released form, and then Meteoric Burst form, Arochi final form, and Awaken Garo at the same time, will they be able to push him to where he has to get serious, or could they potentially defeat him? I'm also giving the big three a buff, I think. They can't accidentally attack each other, meaning that if Saitama misdirects a blast from Orochi, which coincidentally leads in the same direction as Garo, it won't hurt him. Okay, so friendly fires off for this match. That's fine. Even at this point, I still don't think it's enough to push Saitama that far. And they're definitely not going to defeat him. Not even close. I honestly think, like, if he just did one serious punch, he'd probably take them all out at the same time. I mean, Arochi for sure, considering that he couldn't even take a normal punch, which self-proclaimed normal punch. And then Awaken Garo probably couldn't take a serious punch. Now, of course, Saitama was holding back against him, so we never really got to see what he was being, like, serious against him the way that he was with Boros. But also, given that Boros, in the Meteoric Burst form, shooting the Collapsing Star Roaring Cannon, couldn't even take the force of a serious punch, not even just physical contact. I don't think all three of them working together are going to be able to survive that. Now, could they, like, overwhelm him to the point of, like, how Meteoric Burst and Release Boros was, where they're, like, knocking him all over the place and getting numerous shots on him? Like, even Awaken Garo was. Like, after he did the abandonment, he was wrecking Saitama. And he even shocked him with his performance. But it wasn't, like, putting him in danger or anything like that. Like, even after that, he, like, you know, he's like, okay, that's pretty cool, but now I'm going to get serious, and then he does a serious table flip. And after that, he's kind of just playing with Awaken Garo. Like, it's just absurd how powerful Saitama is. And even if all three of these powerhouses, who are all of the strongest villains we have ever seen so far, not counting God, because we don't know anything about him yet, even at this point, I still don't think it's going to be enough to push Saitama to trying seriously. Like, the most serious thing he's going to do is like a serious punch or like maybe a serious headbutt or something like that. Will we see Saitama get to that point in the series? I certainly hope so. I hope Blast push him further than these guys, but I think God is probably going to be the one to do that.
Water Bottle asks, Hello Shonen, I have an interesting versus battle that no one has asked before. So Boros versus a single Dream Subterranean. I think this battle could be made a reality if Saitama were to use something similar to the VGS. That would be awesome. I remember like maybe a year ago or something, I was campaigning for us to, I don't know, somehow get Murata and One's attention to get them to like make a bonus chapter where it's like a sequel to the VGS audiobook, but it's like Saitama's brain that gets read instead. Of course, it did happen, and it will never happen. And don't even bother Murata and One on Twitter. You're just, you know, it will fall on deaf ears. But what I'm saying is, I agree with you, Water Bottle, 100%. But as for the question at hand here, this is a very intriguing matchup, or interesting, as you say. And I don't think anyone has asked me this before, and it's difficult to say. Because on the surface, you think that, okay, Boros probably isn't as strong as the Dream Subterraneans, even the weakest ones. But then if you really get into the nitty gritty of it, you see there's like some trickery going on here because yes, the Dream Subterraneans definitely damaged Saitama way more than Boros ever did, even at the peak of his strength, and also pushed Saitama, using way more effort than he did. But at the same time, it's like it was the Dream, and within the Dream, we're going to see some weird inconsistencies. So for example, like the Dream Subterraneans punching Saitama, strong enough to get an earnest response out of him, strong enough to break his skin and draw blood from Saitama. But when they're like hitting the environment, it's making the same impact that like a demon would or something. Like look at it for yourself. And then if we go back to Meteor friggin' Burst Boros, when he's just throwing a punch after like leaping or sprinting at Saitama, that thing is leveling a portion of a darn city. Okay, so if that punch isn't even damaging Saitama close to the point of the Dream Subterraneans, don't you think that a punch that they would be throwing would be doing double the damage of that to the environment or something? I don't expect them to be scientific or try to, match up with the continuity here. Also goes back to what I was saying about the Dream stuff. So it's like really got to take that with a big grain. Like take the whole thing of salt, dump it in your mouth for this one because I don't know. It's like is Saitama at his normal power in the Dream, or is he nerfed himself? It's like I don't know. It's like are these guys demons and they're hurting Saitama because he's so nerfed? That's so many variables here. But I will say that if we're just going, off of what we're seeing here, not trying to draw too much, context or continuity into things, I would say that Meteor Burst Boros could compete against the weaker Subterraneans for sure. Defeating them, maybe, but I think once he starts going down below and he's getting to the big Subterraneans, then maybe he's not going to be able to do it, or maybe he could. But I think even if he somehow made it to the Subterranean King, who pretty much implied to be disaster level god, I think that's where Boros, his little journey ends there. But man, fun to think about. As he asks, on a pure conjectural level, could Boros' collapsing star roaring cannon, assuming it is really a straight planet-busting attack, injure or even defeat the form that God took when showing itself to Psychos? I don't think so. I mean, we're only speaking on a conjectural level here at this point, but I assume that Boros has to be weaker than God, and not by a little bit, probably by a lot. And of course, I always hype up Boros. This doesn't mean that he's weak by any means. It's just that God is so unbelievably overpowered that even somebody like him is probably not going to be able to defeat him, even using all of their energy, their final trump card ultimate attack, such as the collapsed star roaring cannon. Even like in his Earth form, I mean, we can only speculate what it is. Like I've said in my reviews many times, that it's probably what his true form is, or something like that. He could be something like Ego, the Living Planet from Marvel. Or, what we saw of Psychos when she was, like, talking to Tatsumaki, like, in theory, I could become the whole planet by, like, using Arochi's meat roots to, like, infect everything. That's probably what God did to some degree. So, does that mean that his physical Earth form, is that durable enough to stop the collapsing star roaring cannon? Like, on a tangible level? I don't know. I mean, maybe. But I assume that, like, he could probably produce some kind of force field or shield or something, probably, because that is in the Esper arsenal, and it seems like God definitely has access to Esper abilities, considering that, like, whenever they go into the third eye ability, the future sight stuff that Shibawa and Psychos did, they interact with God to some degree, and also God, interacting with Homeless Emperor in that spatial place that we saw Phoenix Man go to with Child Emperor. He's probably got to have some kind of abilities like that. So, no, I don't think Boros, even with the collapsed star roaring cannon, could defeat God, regardless of what form he's in. Free t-shirts asked, so if Arochi confused with other people like he did with Psycho, so let's say hypothetically Boros got his hands on Arochi and attempted to merge with him, what's the final result looking like? Have a good week, dude. So, I guess Arochi would, like, just take Boros and use him as like a power source or something. I mean, a lot of the thing that's going on with Arochi was assisted by God, but if it was just straight up Arochi using like his meat stuff to take Boros, he would be in control pretty much. So he would be an Arochi, a Boros powered Arochi, if you will. And that would be insane because Arochi is already super powerful, as we saw, but giving him like the crazy, insane planet busting power of Boros, we're looking at a full-blown disaster level god threat quite easily.
Big Bad Brown Bear asks, if Tatsumaki decided to lift King on a Boros ship back in Season 1, how do you think the conversation/fight between King and Boros would have gone? Hey, so thank you for your new patronage, Brown Bear. I appreciate that, my friend. I actually made a video about this last year. I mean, unfortunately, it's not up anymore, but I was really proud of that video. I felt like I made little to no mistakes in it, but I'll break it down for you here. So, more or less, King is going to win this, because you know how I feel about King, but you also know how I feel about Boros. Both of these guys are some of my favorite characters in the series, but I don't really have a bias here. I honestly do think that King would win. So, one way or another, Boros is going to find out that King is known as the strongest man on Earth. Maybe in this situation, Tatsumaki is saying it, because obviously that's what Boros wants. He's going to, some way or another, ask who is the strongest man on Earth, because that's why he's here. That's what he wants. So once he hears that, this is the beginning of the end for him. Essentially, this is like King's spell activating before even King has to talk. And I assume that when Boros sees King, King's meta luck is going to have Boros observe him the same way that Boros observed Saitama. Like when we saw the aura emanating off of him, what was known as the immeasurable energy or the immeasurable strength, whatever it was called, various translations and whatnot. So Boros is also going to talk to King. He's not going to attack him immediately, because we saw that Boros talked to Saitama. He let his backstory out and whatnot before he attacked him or anything. And this is the beginning of the end, because if you talk to King, you've already lost. You're going to fall into his spell. So one way or another, I think King is just going to simply convince Boros that it's not worth it, and that he should just leave and go somewhere else, because Boros is already susceptible to falling for the hype. We saw that when he talked to the fortune teller, he believed him, despite Boros' boys being like, yo, this guy's full of crap, he's just trying to get us to leave. Boros was like, nah, I'm going to give this guy the benefit of the doubt, I want to believe the hype. So I think that means that he would totally believe or fall for what King is saying, because King is obviously convinced other characters of similar power, not exactly as powerful as him, but believed whatever he was saying. I mean, he didn't even have to talk sometimes, and they just simply believe that King is right in what he is saying. You know, what we saw with Atomic Samurai, and we saw how Golden S reacted to King. So I think Boros is definitely susceptible to falling into King's spell here, and that would just lead to King winning via Boros leaving. So yeah, people don't like that. They're like, well, he didn't win because he didn't defeat him. Well, this is a victory. Like in my How Strong is King video, one of the big points I made was that you don't have to physically defeat someone. You don't have to kill them. You simply just talking to them and resolving that way is still a victory. Like in Fallout New Vegas, you can defeat the final boss just through dialogue if your speech and charisma is high enough. And I think that's what happened. That's what would happen with King here.
Lindu K asks, hey Z, love the content as always. Keep it up. So excited for the next chapter to come out. I know, me too. Hopefully they can get back on consistent release schedules, eventually. My question for this week is, do you think the prophecy which led Boros on his 20-year journey to Earth was talking about blasts at Saitama? This is a great question, and I've been asked this consistently since I think I started this game, honestly. And, I do think that the Boros prophecy might be more integral to the story than what we initially thought. Like, I don't think it's just some kind of throwaway thing, or at least entirely. I mean, there's like a percentage chance, but this all depends on how powerful God is, because I don't think it was Blast that the prophecy was talking about, but more so God, the guy that gave Homeless Emperor his powers, the guy that has been subject of discussion lately since, chapter 132 came out. Because if this Esper stuff that exists within the One Punch Man world, if it is relative to the universe as a whole, like if it's not just indigenous to Earth, then I guess that everyone is kind of psychically linked into this Esper third eye thing that Shibawa and Psychos was able to tap into, meaning that alien seer that Boros, went to, he was just a super powerful Esper, and they all kind of share the same thing, regardless of the distance between them, because they're kind of going into another dimension, so it doesn't matter if it's light years or whatever, I assume. So, and also, another thing we see in chapter 132, God appears to be like that orb, that Earth, the planet-like thing, and it's in the cosmos and everything. So that could be giving more insight into maybe this is a cosmic thing. And I'm thinking that maybe the alien seer just was like, oh, wow, there's this super powerful dude that just, 20 million light years or however far away it was, down the turnpike on this planet called Earth, there's this crazy being there that will definitely give you a challenge, Boros. He's probably disaster level god since his name's God after all. And I'm thinking that's what Boros went after, listening to the seer. And then when he got there, obviously he ran into Saitama, got dominated, and he was like, it was a lie. This wasn't a close fight at all. So maybe that also kind of means that maybe Boros could have, I don't know, competed against God. Not saying he could have defeated him, but you know what I mean. Like, maybe it wouldn't have been as one-sided as his fight against Saitama was, possibly. But I don't think it was Blast. That would be cool if it was Blast, but I think more so this is all pointing towards God being connected to everything.
Chase C asks, hey Zhoniin, back again this week for some more battle anime matchups. Love to hear your thoughts as always, and keep up the good work. Hey, thanks, Chase. Battle scenario. Boros' ship landed 50 years earlier, and instead of Saitama being the warrior he encountered, it was instead Prime, Bang, and Bomb. To make it more interesting, let's say in this battle, Boros cannot use his collapsed star roaring cannon. So this is a super interesting question. So we're going off of Prime Bang here, and we're going off of released Boros, because, I don't know, maybe they do something to take his armor off. Maybe they do avoid aura ripping fists and they break the armor when they first encounter him, or he just takes it off. So let's just go straight to released Boros, because it's difficult to say how strong just armored Boros is. These two at their prime, we can assume is much more powerful than they were currently at 80 years old, are likely ridiculous. They're like, I don't know, Golden S level, maybe somewhere around there, because they're already kind of high dragon, so I assume they gotta be above that, right? Maybe, it's hard to say, we're just guessing with these guys, and I don't want to trigger too many people, but them together, it would be like two Golden S's going against released Boros, which would kind of be competitive. Now, it's difficult to say how long they would be able to compete against him, because he shows some outrageous power and speed. And given that, like, they are pretty tanky, I mean, they took Melzergard, well, at least Bang did, took Melzergard's, one of his best strikes, and just shook it off. I mean, it did mess him up, but then we're going, like, with them taking Elder Centipede's headbutt, and it didn't really mess them up too bad, so they're pretty durable, and if we're just increasing that, then I'm sure they would be durable enough to keep up with release Boros for a little bit, but then they could use the Crossfang Dragon Slayer Fist, avoid Aura Ripping, and all of that stuff, and would that still be enough? And also, if he's not even using the Collapsed Star Roaring Cannon, he could still shoot like an energy blast from him. He still has that inherent ability, and then he has his regeneration. And then, like, if they go Abandonment, it's unknown if Bomb can use the Abandonment. I don't think he can. But if Bang uses the Abandonment and Bomb does whatever he could do, then, we're going up a level. Then, like, if they even somehow, if the fight gets this far and they could somehow push Boros to Meteor Burst level, then I think it's over for them. Even if they are, like, approaching Awakened Garo territory, and that's a big maybe if they are, I still don't think that's quite enough to deal with Meteor Burst Boros. Now, I'm not saying Awakened Garo can't defeat Meteor Burst Boros. I'm going to make a whole video about this maybe next month, I don't know. But it's hard to say, honestly, because of how outrageous his feats are and how we can only really guess about Prime, Bang, and Bomb. But they would definitely do better than most, I would say. But winning is a whole different other thing. Like, I can't just say that they would win because he's just so outrageous, even in just his released form. But I do think that they could compete against him. Like, he wouldn't just blow them out of the water immediately. I think they could get some stuff going, but man, I think Boros would probably get the better of them.
Little Dolphin asks, hey Z, what's good? My first question, if Boros had another stronger form after Meteoric Burst, and what form would it look like, and what would the disaster level be? So I brought up a picture of what I think Boros' next form would be. I always assumed that it would be like red or something, since that's a color that he hasn't explored yet. And I got this from the 4th volume cover of Genocyber. It's a crazy anime from the 90s. And I suggest only the most daring and bold viewers of battle anime or just anime in general should watch Genocyber. If not, stay away from it because it's pure concentrated nightmare fuel. But anyway, I think it'll look something like this, pretty cool. And, I mean, he's got to be God level at that point, right? If we're talking about something stronger than Meteor Burst, there's only God after that, I suppose. Meaning that he'd be faster, stronger, more durable, and have even more of an energy output than we initially saw. And that's going into, like, Dragon Ball Z stuff.
Free t-shirts asked, hey Zhoniin, wasn't here last week, but I'm glad to be back. I wanted to think of a fun question, so in your opinion, in a fight between the entire Monster Association and the Dark Matter Thieves, who would come out on top? And to make it fair, let's say that their ship isn't here and it's not in the Monster HQ, just an abandoned city. Hope you've had a good few weeks. I look forward to more of your videos. Take care. Hey, you too, free t-shirts. So, this is not as clear-cut as most people think, and I know the hardcores are going to be like, Boros wins, Boros swiped left on the entire association, he watches everyone, it's over. And like I said, I don't think it's that definitive. Now, I love Boros, one of my favorite characters, I hype him up just as much as anyone, but let's go more into it. So the association has like 500 or so members to it, and there's just way too many people to account for, so let's get rid of the fodder and the demons. Let's just say that Gory Boss sprays acid on all of them. So now we only have the cadres and the cadre executives and Hellfire and Gale left. So, Murata said that if the three generals, Gory Boss, Melzergard, Grugenshu, were to go against Arochi, they wouldn't stand a chance at all. Even if they teamed up, had a plan or whatever, he would just low dip them, no problem. Now, one didn't say that, but maybe one said something to Murata that made him think that. Regardless, this is the closest that we have to what would happen between them. So let's just put the generals against the cadres. So I scaled Grugenshu to somewhere around Psychos level. Maybe a little stronger, maybe on the same level, somewhere around there. So just Grugenshu would have his hands full with Psychos. And now Melzergard, he could compete against multiple cadres, but they're eventually going to figure out his marble thing, just like the S-Class heroes did. Maybe you go Ketsu just by himself will be able to figure that out, because you saw that, he has the 4 eyes, and he obviously has a keen perception of things, because he was eyes were moving super fast to keep up with Chose versus Suiryu, so I'm assuming that he'd be able to catch on to the marble thing way faster than Metalbat did, so it's not looking too good for Melzergard. And then Gory Boss, who's said to be the strongest warrior, has acid and all that stuff. He could probably put up a good fight against most of them. But this is eventually going to come down to just too much volume for the Dark Matter Thieves here. And some cadres will die, probably. But I think all of the generals will eventually die as well. So it's essentially going to come down to Boros having to go against almost all of the cadres and Arochi. So for sure, Released is not going to be enough to take them down. He will have to go Meteor Burst in order to compete against all of these crazy characters. I'm talking we've got Arochi, first of all. That's just somebody that Boros would have to take care of just by himself. But then we've got Psycho's potential backup, Black S, who can become Golden S, Goketsu, Homeless Emperor, Neon, Overgrown Rover, Evil Natural Water, Elder Centipede, Gums, Fear Ugly, and then Hellfire and Gale if they're still alive. Let's just say they died or something. But then, he's going to have to deal with, all the cover fire from Homeless Emperor, Overgrown Rover, and Evil Natural Water. And then he's going to have also the fire from Orochi. And it's so Meteor Burst. That's why I'm saying he has to immediately go to this form. Or he's just going to get trounced if he doesn't. Yes, I even think that somebody as strong as that is going to get trounced by all of these high dragons and Arochi all working in tandem. Come on, guys. But so Meteor Burst is way faster than all of them. There's no doubt about that, and way stronger from a physical standpoint as well. So it really depends on how long Boros can use Meteor Burst. Can he use it long enough to take out all of these guys? Remains to be seen. So Gums and Fear Ugly got soloed by Abandonment Bang. So we know somewhat of a rough estimate of where they go with that level of power. And Meteor Burst is obviously way stronger than Abandonment Bang. So I assume that Meteor Burst can just one-hit a bunch of these dudes. Evil Natural Water, probably not, because he survived a punch from Saitama, although it really reduced him to a heart. So I think Evil Natural Water would still be in there. Overgrown River would probably still be in there. And then the rest of them, Goketsu, Golden S, because I assume that he's going to become Golden S at this point when he sees Boros. This is going to be super competitive because they're all going to be working against him. And then we can't forget about Arochi. So it's hard to say. In both instances, I think either side could win. Now, if Meteor Burst Boros, of course, did the classic Star Roaring Cannon, destroys the Earth, yeah, he wins. But are they going to let him do that? And also, it's Meteor Burst has to, use all of his energy in order to use that attack. That's his final thing he's done after that. Are they going to let him get to that point? Because Saitama just kind of allowed it to happen. And now we've got all these bloodthirsty savages all working together, going at him 100% aggressively. It's like difficult to say. So yeah, I think Meteor Burst Boros might be able to solo them. Maybe. But at the same time, it's like they probably could overwhelm him at the same time. We've got so many powerful characters here working together. So I would say it's like 60 or maybe even 55% in favor of Meteor Burst Boros with the assistance of the generals beforehand taking this one. But then there's like maybe even like 45% chance, or maybe even higher than that, that all of the cadres with Arochi working together might be able to take this one. It's hard to say, but you know, you're probably just going to say Boros anyway, but just really think about it. Think how crazy this matchup would be. I'd love to see it.